Chapter 59. At this point, the refining of the artifact was almost complete. This magical tool was extremely mysterious. It seemed to exist between reality and illusion. Its shape was like a solid, but it was also like a gas, and it was even more like a liquid. It was constantly changing between reality and illusion. Sometimes it was faintly discernible, as if it was in another space. Sometimes it was calm and motionless, like Mount Bujo. It meandered and rotated in front of Luo Fan like a living creature. During the refining process, the tens of millions of heavy turbid talismans that Luo Fan had collected in the netherworld for 3 years had already been completely integrated into this artifact. They were completely entangled with the tens of millions of talismans that he had cast out, scattered, and reorganized, and finally formed 18 layers of unimaginably complicated and mysterious restrictions. These 18 restrictions were not the peak of this artifact. According to Luo Fan's design and the endurance of the netherworld heavenly river, at least 31 more restrictions could be constructed in this artifact. In other words, the peak state of this magic tool was as many as 49 restrictions. Compared to the Yellow Turban Strongman Emperor, it had 13 more restrictions. After the 49 restrictions were constructed, it could communicate with its heart and nourish it with its spirit. Finally, it could produce spiritual consciousness and become a treasure spirit, a magical artifact. It could be said that its future was quite promising. At this moment, although this artifact had only 18 restrictions, which was not even half of the peak, its power was already extremely shocking. Even if it was Luo Fan himself, as long as he refined this artifact, he could use its power at any time to more than double his strength, and if Hongjun refined it at this time, his strength could at least increase by 100 times. This was because Hongjun's physical body was too weak and could not withstand too much power. If Hongjuan's physical strength could be increased by several times, the multiplier could reach at least 1,000 times. The reason why this artifact could have such power was that the restrictions of this artifact were created by Luo Fan based on the innate ability of the talisman ghost. It could borrow the power of the tens of millions of heavy turbid talismans that were integrated into the artifact at any time. Moreover, the way in which the restrictions created by Luo Fan utilized energy was much more exquisite and profound than the talisman ghost. After all, the tangible rune ghost knew how to use its own supernatural power, but did not know why. Although it was born with this supernatural power, it only knew how to use it crudely. How could this method of application compare to Luo Fan's understanding from the essence? Luo Fan's mind stirred slightly, and the yellow jade-like, sparkling and translucent magic tool suddenly spun and shook, forming an auspicious cloud in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan took a step forward and stepped onto the auspicious cloud. The moment his feet came into contact with the magic cloud, a feeling of becoming incomparably powerful appeared in his heart. He raised his hand and clenched it lightly. The air exploded like a thunderbolt. Even the space in his hand seemed to be slightly distorted. Even the space of a many-thousand world couldn't bear such a gentle grip from him. Luo Fan had already attained the earthly immortal's Tao fruit, and his strength was already very powerful. Although his strength only doubled after obtaining the magic tool, in terms of the absolute increase in strength, it was already an incomparably amazing increase in strength. The increase doesn't seem to be as much as I thought. Luo Fan looked at it, but he was somewhat dissatisfied. The degree of distortion in the space seemed to be only a little stronger than when he didn't use the magic tool to increase his strength. There was no essential breakthrough at all. It seemed that the increase in strength of this magic tool was much weaker than what he had imagined. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind stirred, and he couldn't help but laugh out loud. It turned out that it wasn't that his progress wasn't big enough, but the stability of this many-thousand world had been greatly improved. This many-thousand world was created by Luo Fan, so Luo Fan could naturally sense the changes in this many-thousand world at any time. At this time, He already understood that in the 1,000 years that he was refining this magic tool, the limitless boy had impressively extracted all the heavy Chi from the talisman ghost. At this time, the land under his feet was 10 times bigger than 1,000 years ago, and the sky was 10 times higher. In the depths of the lightning pool, the tangible talisman ghost had already disappeared. There was only a white humanoid talisman ghost that was as small as a baby's fist that looked like a sculpture. It was tightly bound by countless purple chains. Although this humanoid talisman was small, the composition of its lines was incomparably complicated and incomparably profound. Its size couldn't compare to the heavy talisman, but its degree of profoundness was 10,000 times stronger than the heavy talisman. Even compared to Luo Fan's magic power unit, it had a different kind of profoundness, and could even be called an existence of the same level. Talisman characters and talisman characters were very similar. At first glance, they might even be confused. But, in fact, there were many essential differences between the two. Among them, the biggest difference was that the talisman character was a complete whole, while the talisman character was a very mysterious unit. The result of this difference was that, if the two were taken out to look at one, the difference would not be very big, and the power would not be too different. Of course, this referred to the situation where the degree of profoundness of the structure was not much different. This was needless to say. But, if a certain number of them were combined, the power that the talisman character could display would definitely be 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times stronger than the talisman character. This was also the reason why the talisman character wanted to combine the power of the many heavy talisman characters, and the reason why Luo Fan wanted to combine the magic power units to display the strongest power was that he could do it with just a thought. So it's the heavy yang talisman. Formless becomes tangible, talisman becomes yang talisman. This really contains endless profoundness. Luo Fan's mind moved, and he already understood what the core of the talisman character was. This heavy yang talisman was formed by the heavy talisman devouring and fusing tens of millions of its kind, but its power was only 10,000 times stronger than the heavy talisman characters. It could be said that most of the power of the heavy talisman had been wasted. But even the simplest process contained endless principles. The principles contained in the devouring and fusion process of the heavy talisman were also quite profound, and it also made Luo Fan feel that he had gained a lot, and he was even more interested in the structure of this heavy yang talisman. He raised his hand and grabbed, and the countless chains around the heavy yang talisman instantly collapsed, turning into thunder water and merging back into the pool of thunder. Then, the heavy yang talisman flew straight up, and instantly came to Luo Fan's hand. Although this heavy yang talisman was the size of a baby's fist, it was very heavy, about 100 kilograms, and it was also very warm, like a warm water bag. His mind moved, and 2 golden lights suddenly shot out from his eyes, covering the heavy yang talisman. In an instant, the entire structure of the heavy yang talisman appeared in his mind. There was a boundless starry sky inside the heavy yang talisman. More than 40 million stars dotted the entire starry sky, forming a very complicated formation with endless mysteries. The formation formed by these stars was constantly rotating, and in almost every blink of an eye, it would change into thousands of forms. And among these forms, it seemed that they were elaborating some kind of indescribable principle. With a thought, Luo Fan already understood that each of these more than 40 million stars was a heavy yang talisman that had been broken and twisted into pieces. Suddenly, his eyes, which could see through the formation and see through the source, slightly flashed. Focusing his mind, he saw an indescribable spiritual light quickly shuttling back and forth between these 40 million stars. Its speed was extremely fast, almost as if it was teleporting. At the same time, every time this spiritual light shuttled back and forth, it seemed to have obtained a little indescribable power, and slightly strengthened. With one look, Luo Fan knew that this spiritual light was the spiritual consciousness of the talisman ghost that had been regenerated. However, this spiritual consciousness was still very weak, and it didn't have the slightest bit of self-awareness or memory. It was muddle-headed, and only knew to constantly shuttle back and forth, constantly absorbing some kind of mysterious power to strengthen itself. Looking at this spiritual light that was constantly flashing, Luo Fan couldn't help but secretly sigh. The talisman ghost originally had a complete spiritual consciousness, and it had occupied hundreds of millions of miles of territory in the Yellow Springs. It had been tyrannical for nearly a yuan hui, but now it only had this muddle-headed spiritual light left. If it wanted to grow into a complete spiritual consciousness again, it would probably take hundreds of thousands of yuan hui. Even if this spiritual light grew, it would no longer be the talisman ghost. Chapter 60. It's just a waste of so many heavy turbid talismans. Luo Fan sighed secretly. He raised his hand and threw it gently. The abnormally heavy turbid yang talisman in his hand instantly rushed out for tens of thousands of miles and sank into a bottomless cave. Although the heavy turbid yang talisman had undergone a qualitative change, from yin to yang, and finally from the original yin talisman to yang talisman, its root was still the heavy turbid yin qi. Relatively speaking, being in a place with rich yin qi was more beneficial for its growth. This mini-kiliacosm was a complete small world. Naturally, it had all kinds of energy and there was no shortage of yin qi. Among them, the place with the richest yin qi was deep under the ground of this continent, which was also the place where Luo Fan threw the heavy turbid yang talisman. Luo Fan did not lack the power of this heavy turbid yang talisman. In addition, he also wanted to see what the spiritual sense that this heavy turbid yang talisman would look like when it grew again. Therefore, he created the best growth conditions for this yang talisman. Master, there are 2 spiritual sense reactions in the southwest 384,520 miles away. At this moment, Limitless Boy's emotionless voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan did not withdraw the order for Limitless Boy to pay attention to the surrounding situation. Therefore, although thousands of years had passed, Limitless Boy was still paying attention to the surroundings. At this moment, he discovered the abnormal situation that Luo Fan asked him to pay attention to. Luo Fan's mind moved. Through the perception amplification of the Void Wuji Palace, he instantly reproduced the scene of the location 380,000 miles away in his mind. It was a valley. It was an ordinary valley in the primordial world, but it seemed extremely vast and huge on Earth. The 3 directions of this valley were surrounded by 5 peaks of hundreds of thousands of feet high, which formed 5 inverted fingers. Only the northwest direction, which was the direction where Luo Fan was unobstructed. The 2 strands of spiritual sense were at the center of the palm where the 5 fingers clasped together. The valley was filled with gray chaotic energy. Its density was almost condensed into a liquid state, blocking the view of the outside world. Of course, this couldn't block Luo Fan's senses. With just a thought, he had already discovered that there were 2 innate gods in this chaotic energy. In other words, it was a pair of black and white flood dragons, 1 male and 1 female, entangled together. At this time, the 2 dragons were circling around, forming a black and white spiral shape. Their heads were touching, and their tails were connected. They formed a circle around the valley, with their heads facing the center of the valley. Yang was also the location where the primal chaos chi was constantly emitting. Flood Dragon. Luo Fan couldn't help but be interested. Over the years, the only innate gods he had met were Hong Jun and the strange tree that he had planned to be his disciple. Now, 2 innate gods appeared at the same time. Moreover, they were creatures that he had imagined many times on Earth. How could he not be interested? Furthermore, the spiritual sense of these 2 flood dragons seemed to be much more complete than that of the strange tree. Although he was still muddle-headed, he was a little more quick-witted. Luo Fan wanted to go over and have a look. With a slight thought, Hong Jun's state appeared in his mind. At this time, Hong Jun was jumping forward in a vast mountain area with a radius of 10,000 miles. His whole body seemed to have no trace of smoke or fire. His movements were extremely concise, and he almost didn't waste any strength. 1,000 years had passed in the spirit space inside the Wuji Palace, and 3 years had passed in the outside world. In these 3 years, Hong Jun still used the same method to seal his energy as before, and only relied on the strength of his body to go to Buzhou Mountain. Because his body had been greatly improved after going through the 7th Metal Thunderfire Tribulation, his speed of progress in these 3 years was much faster than before. Now, the distance between him and Buzhou Mountain was less than 2 million miles. This distance, relative to the loftiness of Buzhou Mountain, was almost close to Buzhou Mountain. Being so close, the desolate and unyielding aura emanating from Buzhou Mountain was even more amazing. Although Hong Jun used to live on the top of Buzhou Mountain, he was always under the protection of the innate inextinguishable spiritual light, and this aura had almost no effect on him. Now, after sealing his energy and absorbing the innate inextinguishable spiritual light into his body, Hong Jun almost lost all protection. Only then did he really feel how strong the aura emanating from Buzhou Mountain was, and how shocking it was. After being immersed in the aura of Buzhou Mountain for a few years, he had gained a lot of benefits, much more than the time he spent on the top of Buzhou Mountain. The most obvious change was that his will had been immersed and crystal clear, just like colored glass. Luo Fan knew that Hong Jun's state at this time did not need him to guard him. Even if he encountered some threats, with the Yellow Turban Hercules Emperor and the 9-Spirit Cloud Light Handkerchief, he could definitely stride over. In an instant, he decided not to hang around with Hong Jun anymore. With a thought, the Wuji Void Palace turned into a purple-yellow light and flew in the southwest direction. After a while, it arrived above the valley with the 2 flood dragons. Arriving here, the purple-yellow light condensed into a square palace. Luo Fan's figure also condensed and appeared above the valley on a yellow cloud. After appearing, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The Wuji Void Palace rushed into his body, and then appeared in his sea of consciousness through a mysterious mechanism. At this moment, an earth-shattering dragon roar sounded from below. The extremely rich chaotic energy, which was almost condensed into a liquid, was constantly tumbling under this dragon roar, producing obvious waves and swirling winds. Luo Fan frowned. In an instant, he felt an extremely fierce and tyrannical aura pouncing on him from below. A mantra flowed through his mind, and his eyes emitted 2 golden rays of light, allowing him to instantly see what changes had happened below. It turned out that the black and white flood dragons woke up almost at the same time. The 4 eyes that were originally closed in confusion were now full of tyrannical killing intent, staring at Luo Fan's figure like 2 suns. They opened their mouths wide and roared at the position where Luo Fan was. Their figure exploded and pounced on Luo Fan. The bodies of these 2 flood dragons were tens of thousands of feet long, and their sizes were hundreds of feet in diameter, which was really amazing. At this time, such a violent roar and pouncing on Luo Fan was really shocking. Eat you, I want to eat. I want to eat. The voices of a man and a woman passed into Luo Fan's ears along with the dragon roar. Luo Fan frowned. It seemed like the consciousness of these 2 flood dragons was even more incomplete than he had imagined. Compared to these 2 flood dragons, Luo Fan's body was even less than an ant. It was as if the flood dragons only needed 1 swipe of their claws to crush him into powder. Faced with the 2 flood dragons, Luo Fan did not panic. The aura that he had been suppressing suddenly dispersed. The aura that would never yield and never give up engulfed the entire valley. This aura was at least 10 times more powerful than the tyrannical and violent aura of the 2 flood dragons. The 2 flood dragons grew up in this valley not far from Buzhou Mountain. They were extremely familiar with the unyielding aura of Buzhou Mountain, and were even used to it. Though Luo Fan's aura was different from the one emitted by Buzhou Mountain, they were similar in origin. Therefore, even though his aura was more than 10 times stronger than the 2 flood dragons, he could not suppress their arrogance. The 2 flood dragons ignored him and pounced on Luo Fan with their claws and fangs bared. Luo Fan sighed. The yellow cloud beneath his feet suddenly dispersed and transformed into a yellow jade robe that covered his entire body. Chapter 61. This giant hand was gray and seemed to be extremely condensed. Looking at it, it was as if it was real. The 2 black and white flood dragons were grabbed by this giant hand, and they let out extremely loud and furious dragon roars. The violent and crazy aura on their bodies instantly became even more violent. The power in their bodies, the chaotic chi that was as deep as the sea, burst out in an instant and madly attacked the giant hand that was tightly holding them. Dragon claws, dragon body, dragon horns, dragon tail, dragon scales. Every part of their bodies and organs became the most powerful weapons in an instant, and they attacked the giant hand that was condensed from the chaotic chi. The giant hand that he condensed suffered such a terrifying attack, but Luo Fan's expression didn't change at all, as if nothing had happened. Although the strength of the 2 flood dragons' struggle was strong, it was only brute force. To Luo Fan, who had attained the earthly immortal Tao fruit, no matter how strong pure brute force was, it was nothing and was unable to pose much threat to him. With a thought, countless talismans flashed in the giant hand. These talismans were faintly discernible, and they seemed to be randomly generated, but they also seemed to have been arranged very cleverly. They moved and flashed in the giant hand, and they were extremely vivid and agile. As these talismans flashed, the strength of the giant hand was visibly increased by hundreds of times. If the original giant hand was as fragile as tofu, then the current giant hand was as hard as a diamond. It was almost impossible to break or destroy. As the strength of the giant hand increased, the 2 flood dragons suddenly let out a miserable howl, and their bodies suddenly collapsed. Then, they directly withered, and the madness and violence that erupted from their bodies completely disappeared at that moment. The various parts of their bodies that had become powerful weapons also returned to normal. Seeing this, Luo Fan covered with his left hand and opened his big sleeve. The giant hand and the 2 flood dragons quickly shrank, and in the blink of an eye, they shrank to the size of a palm and were put into Luo Fan's sleeve. Universe in Sleeve wasn't just a simple storage ability. It was a type of ability to trap and destroy enemies. The reason why Luo Fan didn't use it in the past was because he didn't meet an opponent that required this ability. Looking at the 2 loach-sized flood dragons in his sleeves, Luo Fan's mind moved, and a section of the mantra flowed through his mind. His mind connection magical ability allowed his mind to connect with the 2 flood dragons. Why are you attacking me? The meaning was not complicated. Even the strange tree would be able to understand it. Not to mention that the spiritual sense of these 2 flood dragons was much more complete than that of the strange tree. Kill you, protect the treasure, protect the treasure. The voices of a man and a woman were somewhat immature, but they contained a lot of fear. They were transmitted into Luo Fan's heart through the spiritual connection. Treasure? Luo Fan's eyes lit up. The innate gods were born naturally by the heaven and earth. They were the first group of living beings born at the beginning of the heaven and earth. These living beings were blessed by the heaven and earth. They themselves were rare treasures. Any part of them could make any cultivator go crazy. Now that there was something that even the innate gods thought was a treasure, it was enough to show how precious, rare, and mysterious the treasure was. Luo Fan asked a few more times, trying to find out the whereabouts of the treasure. Unfortunately, although the 2 flood dragons were very afraid of Luo Fan, they were especially stubborn when it came to the treasure. No matter what methods Luo Fan used, they just didn't answer and pretended not to hear. Luo Fan asked a few more questions. He knew that this was the deepest shackles of their pure hearts. He didn't want to ask any more. He didn't believe that he couldn't find the treasure when the two flood dragons could. He gently raised his hand and squeezed. The giant hand that caught the two flood dragons suddenly shrank, condensed, and became a spherical, gray crystal ball, wrapping the two flood dragons in it. In the gray crystal ball, there were countless talismans constantly moving. They turned into chains and tightly locked the two flood dragons. The two flood dragons completely lost control of their bodies and energy. The two flood dragons were like mosquitoes in amber, frozen in the crystal ball. They couldn't move, and even their spiritual consciousness was frozen. They couldn't think. This kind of sealing method wasn't too mysterious, and there was nothing worth mentioning. After all, if the Limitless Boy could do it, how could Luo Fan not do it? With a thought, the limitless void palace in his sea of consciousness suddenly spun and trembled, appearing outside his body. He gently raised his hand and threw the crystal ball that wrapped the two flood dragons straight into the limitless palace. It was suppressed by Luo Fan in the depths of the Thunderbolt Pool. The Thunderbolt Pool in the limitless palace suppressed the whole spirit space. It was the most stable and core place in the whole spirit space. To suppress the innate deities, it was the best choice. Without paying too much attention to the two flood dragons, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The limitless palace rushed straight into the space between his eyebrows and returned to his sea of consciousness. He raised his head and looked down. The scene of the valley appeared in front of Luo Fan's eyes. Because the primordial energy had been condensed into the crystal ball, there was nothing in the valley except for the primordial energy. Apart from the chaotic yuan qi that was surging out like a fountain, everything was clear and bright. There were no longer any of the gray clouds that blocked the way. The whole valley could be seen at a glance. A mnemonic chant flowed through Luo Fan's mind, and two golden rays of light shot out from his eyes, enveloping the entire valley. This time, because of the worries in his heart, once he used the ability to see through the formation, he directly increased its power to the maximum. Then, with the help of the Limitless Void Palace's amplification ability, he could see through a depth of 5,000 miles underground. Below the valley, there was a tributary of the Yellow Spring, about 2,000 miles above the ground. This tributary was 500 miles wide, which was quite vast. Where is the treasure? Luo Fan carefully examined the 5,000 miles of the ground and was puzzled. Underground, there was the biggest source of primordial energy that Luo Fan had ever seen. It was extremely solid and huge, almost filling the whole underground of the valley. Around this source of primordial energy, there were countless rare treasures, such as 5 elemental essence, evil chi crystals, primordial steel, and so on. They were like ordinary sand and stones scattered all over the 5,000 miles of the ground. However, these were just ordinary treasures. Even Luo Fan himself felt that they were just ordinary treasures, let alone the two dragons with shallow knowledge and experience. The golden light passed through the Yellow Spring and continued to go deeper. So it's here. Looking at the depth of 4,900 miles, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable joy. This joy was so strong that it almost caused his earthly immortal Tao fruit to show signs of instability. In the 4,900 miles of the ground, there was a small space about 10 feet wide where the source of primordial energy overlapped. In this small space there was only one thing. It was a gray spiritual light that constantly exuded an indescribable and mysterious aura. Connate inextinguishable spiritual light. Luo Fan instantly determined what that light was. Chapter 62. Hong Jun, the disciple of Luo Fan, had a congenital inextinguishable divine light. With the privilege of being Hong Jun's master, he had studied this congenital inextinguishable divine light in detail. He had absolute confidence in the characteristics and feelings of the congenital inextinguishable divine light, and he was confident that he would never make a mistake. Therefore, just by looking at the spiritual light below, he was sure that it was definitely the primordial world's innate inextinguishable spiritual light. It was innately born, undamaged, and would never dissipate or be destroyed. Unless one had attained the primordial Tao fruit, no matter how strong they were, they could only seal and suppress it. They were absolutely unable to destroy it. In Luo Fan's heart, this divine light was not just a divine light, but represented eternal life. Although Luo Fan was a congenital deity in this life, as long as he breathed in the congenital primordial qi, he would never age or die. However, since the creation of this world, it had irreversibly evolved from the congenital primordial qi to the acquired primordial qi. One day, the congenital primordial qi in this untainted world would be transformed into the acquired primordial qi. Although this process might be as long as tens of millions of yuan, or even hundreds of millions of yuan, it was clear that there would always be such a day. At that time, the innate gods would no longer be able to maintain their characteristics of never aging and never dying. What awaited Luo Fan would perhaps be a slow march towards death, however, as long as he obtained a congenital inextinguishable divine light, the situation would change fundamentally. That was, time would become meaningless to him. The characteristics of never dissipating and never being destroyed determined eternal life, no matter how the external environment changed, no matter how time passed. Seeing such a treasure buried in the ground, how could Luo Fan bear it? With a thought, the limitless void palace in the sea of consciousness suddenly rushed out and arrived outside of his body. It turned into a purplish-yellow ray of light, and with a roll, it wrapped his body in the light. Then, the purplish-yellow light brought Luo Fan's figure down and disappeared into the thick ground in the blink of an eye. The infinite void palace was a Dharma treasure. Its speed was astonishing, and it avoided the obstruction of the ground to the greatest extent. In a short while, it had already brought Luo Fan's figure through the chaotic primordial qi source, through the tributary of the Yellow Springs, and through a layer of dense evil qi. Finally, it arrived at the 30-meter space 490 kilometers underground. As soon as he entered this space, Luo Fan instantly escaped from the envelopment of the limitless palace. His body flashed, and he appeared in the 100-meter wide space. An unimaginably powerful pressure arose spontaneously. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that his body seemed to be showing signs of instability. It was something that he had never felt since attaining the born Taoism aptitude. The feeling that his body was about to collapse instantly flowed through his mind and will. This primordial inextinguishable divine light rejecting me? Luo Fan instantly understood what was going on. Combining the general knowledge left by Pengu's original spirit in his mind and the performance of Hongjuan's primordial inextinguishable divine light, he had already understood another characteristic of the primordial inextinguishable divine light. The primordial inextinguishable divine light was born with the characteristic of being undamaged after birth. In this vast untainted land, its quantity was fixed. Luo Fan did not know the specific value of this quantity. But obviously it would not be a lot. Such a treasure, such a mysterious primordial inextinguishable divine light, was naturally full of spirituality, which was not something that ordinary treasures could compare with. If it was left to evolve, after a long time, it would eventually become an extremely mysterious primordial spiritual treasure. Even ordinary Dharma treasures had incomplete spiritual consciousness. Since this primordial spiritual treasure was so mysterious, it would probably have a more complete spiritual consciousness. Therefore, the instinct of any spiritual thing determined that the primordial inextinguishable divine light would reject all primordial gods and reject the fate of being obtained by any primordial god. As for Hongjun, who could be born with the primordial inextinguishable divine light and easily take it as his own, it was absolutely rare. But it could not be regarded as normal. Knowing this characteristic, Luo Fan felt a little regretful, but he did not give up the idea of taking the inextinguishable divine light. With a thought, the Wuji Void Palace instantly unfolded, turning into a purplish-yellow light that attached itself to the topaz robe, isolating the pressure that was so strong that even his born Taoism body could not withstand it. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. A powerful, invisible force appeared out of thin air and wrapped around the ever-changing, gray, and extremely profound connate indestructible spirit light that gave off a profound aura. The spirituality of this divine light was obviously stronger than that of Hongjuan's. The rejection of being taken by others was also stronger, and it struggled wildly. Crack, an invisible sound was heard, and the invisible force that Luo Fan produced was broken like fragile glass. It actually produced such a strange sound, and in the end it completely disappeared. It's really not simple. It's really powerful. I've achieved my Tao. Luo Fan was not surprised, but happy. A mantra flowed through his mind. The earthly immortal's fruit of Wei in his body shook, and 81 units of mana came out. They surrounded the meridians in his body and formed a complicated and mysterious cycle. They turned into a transparent energy that rushed out of his body and condensed into a transparent giant hand. It was 3 feet wide, and it grabbed the primordial inextinguishable divine light that was sinking. After the primordial inextinguishable divine light was grabbed, the extremely powerful pressure in the space instantly disappeared, as if it was completely isolated. This made Luo Fan feel relaxed. However, his mood did not relax. This was because the primordial inextinguishable divine light was flashing, jumping, and vibrating. It produced a very strange and terrifying force that attacked the giant hand. Luo Fan smiled. He raised his hand and waved. Countless shadows of talismans flashed in the giant hand. The strength of the giant hand suddenly increased by many times. No matter how the primordial inextinguishable divine light struggled, it could not escape the grasp of the giant hand. It could not break out of the giant hand's control and regain its vitality. "You withdraw," he shouted. The giant hand suddenly shrank and turned into a ray of light. It rushed straight into the space between Luo Fan's eyebrows. Through some mysterious mechanism, it rushed straight into the world of his consciousness. After entering the world of his consciousness, the giant hand collapsed in an instant and condensed into 81 small, three-dimensional talismans in the shape of Buzhou Mountain. They released the primordial inextinguishable divine light and rushed into a mysterious place. They left the world of his consciousness and returned to the earthly immortal's fruit of Wei. The primordial inextinguishable divine light lost its restriction and rushed everywhere. Suddenly, the Buzhou Mountain formed by Luo Fan's consciousness shook. It produced an incomparably powerful suction force that sucked in the primordial inextinguishable divine light that was rushing everywhere. With a pull, the inextinguishable divine light was pulled inside. It was suppressed in the deepest part of his consciousness. It was also at the bottom of Buzhou Mountain. Phew! Luo Fan let out a long breath. A joyful smile appeared on his face. Although the primordial inextinguishable divine light still rejected him, after being absorbed into the deepest part of his consciousness, the fate of this divine light being subdued was already decided. He only needed to work hard. After a long time, he would definitely be able to eliminate this rejection. Although the primordial inextinguishable divine light was full of spirituality, it did not have spiritual consciousness. It was not as difficult to subdue it as it was to subdue a talisman ghost. Chapter 63. Naturally, Luo Fan was overjoyed that he had benefited from it. He turned around and the purplish-yellow light that covered his body exploded, flashed, and extinguished. Not long after, he was already more than a mile above the ground. That was where the source of primordial energy was located. The source of primordial energy was huge and spherical. It seemed to have a diameter of more than 300 miles. The top was about a mile above the ground. In terms of size and distance, it was considered very close. The source of primordial energy was very lively, or rather, explosive. It constantly exploded with powerful streams of primordial energy that rushed out in all directions. The ground in all directions withstood different forces. As a result, in the direction where the ground was the weakest, a tunnel of several feet in circumference was created, and it became the outlet for all the chaotic energy. In other words, a tunnel was created above the ground and connected to the ground. All the primordial energy swarmed out of this passage, rushed for a mile, and rushed out of the ground. When he came to the side of the source of primordial energy, Luo Fan's mind moved. The purplish-yellow light formed by the everlasting void palace left his body and instantly condensed around him. Then, Luo Fan took a step forward and was already on top of the source of primordial energy. He sat cross-legged on top of the source of primordial energy, as if he was sitting on a throne. At the same time, the yellow robe around his body suddenly scattered, condensing into a yellow jade-like magic tool, rushing into his lower abdomen and dantian. It turned into an auspicious cloud and surrounded the earthly immortal fruit of the way. Unlike this magic tool, the everlasting void palace suddenly sank into the center of the source of primordial energy. Yang. Previously, with the ability to see through the source of primordial energy, Luo Fan had already clearly seen the inside of the source of primordial energy. Naturally, he knew that there were no extremely precious primordial stones in the source of primordial energy. Therefore, he didn't need to waste his energy to sense it. After sitting cross-legged, he took a deep breath and slowly operated the magic power in his body. At the same time, the mantra of the nameless divine skill flowed through his mind. An incomparably powerful suction force was suddenly produced from his body. In the blink of an eye, the chaotic vital energy that was constantly emitted by the chaotic vital energy source changed its direction. From the tunnel that was originally leading upwards, it suddenly rushed towards his body. Like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, it went straight into it. Then, it was crushed and purified by the magical power and swept away. The magical power units in Luo Fan's body were three-dimensional talismans shaped like Buzhou Mountain. Inside each magical power unit, there seemed to be a huge void. In the past few years, he had spent most of his time familiarizing himself with his own strength and practicing how to use his magic power. As for strengthening his physical strength, absorbing the primal chi of chaos, and enriching the three-dimensional talisman, he had put these things aside. Of course, this method was absolutely correct. It was definitely a way to continuously strengthen his foundation, allowing him to have more room for improvement in the future, and the process of improvement would be smoother. However, this also resulted in a result. Although his strength had increased from time to time after attaining the Earth Immortal's fruit of Wei, his spiritual power was still empty, and he still couldn't unleash the supreme power of his spiritual power. The current situation was that Hong Jun was under the protection of multiple instruments. As long as he carefully avoided the overly dangerous places, his life wouldn't be in danger. As for Luo Fan, he had obtained the connate inextinguishable spiritual light, but he still needed to use a lot of effort to subdue it. Plus, he felt that he had already stabilized his cultivation. All these situations intertwined together, which made him decide to absorb the primal chi of chaos here to enrich his spiritual power. Needless to say, the Void Wuji Palace was like this. The reason why the Void Wuji Palace was in such a state right now was because it could only produce chi that was in between the primal chi of chaos and the primal chi of chaos. After the time acceleration, the chi that was gathered could only support Luo Fan's consumption. Wasn't this because the primal chi of chaos was too little? Now that there was a chance to absorb the primal chi of chaos, how could Luo Fan let it go? The Void Wuji Palace absorbing the primal chi of chaos was equivalent to a lesser kiliacosm absorbing the primal chi of chaos. Although Luo Fan's spiritual power was strong and the Earth Immortal's fruit of Wei was mysterious, in terms of absorbing the primal chi of chaos, it was far inferior to a lesser kiliacosm. As the two of them absorbed the primal chi of chaos, the primal chi of chaos that gushed out from the middle of the valley and out of the entrance of the crypt completely disappeared. Even the primal chi of chaos that was already out of the crypt was being sucked by an invisible force and poured into the crypt. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. At this time, Luo Fan was in a mysterious state of no man and no self. His body was almost instinctively absorbing the primal chaos energy from the outside world. Suddenly, his heart was stirred, and he felt as if someone was calling him. He suddenly woke up from that mysterious state, as if he had just woken up from a dream. An incomparably relaxed, comfortable, and satisfied feeling flowed through his mind. With the help of one person and one treasure, in just 10 years, the chaotic energy source beneath him had shrunk to a third of its original size. Originally, it was only a mile above the ground, but now it was dozens of miles above the ground. The primal chi of chaos below him had turned into a very strange shape. Circles and circles of ripples were constantly undulating on the surface of the primal chi of chaos. The ripples intersected and formed a scene as if the primal chi of chaos was constantly shrinking and being pushed inwards. The changes below combined with the primal chi of chaos around Luo Fan's body. It was like a gourd with a great contrast between the top and bottom. Disciple Hongjun prays to Master. Disciple has arrived at Buzhou Mountain. Master, please show me the way. The voice came from the dark and went straight into his mind. Luo Fan's mind moved, and the scene where the voice came from appeared in his mind at the same time. He saw Hongjuan's figure beside a towering mountain. His body was surrounded by a vast and unyielding aura that was almost solidified. Because he could only see a radius of several thousand feet around Hongjun, he could not see the entire mountain clearly. He only knew that it was extremely tall and huge. However, through the perception of this aura, Luo Fan already knew that this mountain could not be anything else other than Buzhou Mountain. So I've already arrived at Buzhou Mountain. Luo Fan smiled. At this time, Hongjun was kneeling on the ground and using soil as an incense stick. He looked in the southwest direction, which was where Luo Fan was praying. The voice that went into Luo Fan's mind was not a real voice, but Hongjuan's prayer. Counting with his fingers, Luo Fan knew that another 10 years had passed. Hongjuan's robe did not change at all, but his face was full of hardships and vicissitudes. There was also an extremely firm and indomitable will coming from his eyes. Obviously, Hongjun had made great progress in the past 10 years. Luo Fan thought for a while and dug out a skill from the depths of his memory. It turned into a spiritual light and went straight to Buzhou Mountain, which was millions of miles away, through the connection in the dark. It went into Hongjuan's mind. Find a place to practice this skill. Along with the spiritual light, Luo Fan said this. Luo Fan had only said these words with his ordinary thoughts, without adding any power to them. But in Hongjuan's ears, it was indescribably majestic. It was like a huge thunder that resounded through the world. As soon as he finished speaking, the spiritual light that went into Hongjuan's mind suddenly exploded, producing an extremely powerful and mysterious impact. It instantly swept through every inch of space in Hongjuan's body, instantly shattering the countless talismans that he sealed his energy. They turned into pure energy again and integrated into his dantian. The aura on Hongjuan's body suddenly flourished, and the gray light flickered on his body. The vicissitudes on his face instantly disappeared, and he looked energetic. Thank you for the skill, Master. Hongjun bowed down respectfully. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved gently. The scene that was reflected in his mind disappeared completely, and he could no longer sense Hongjuan's thoughts. He had cut off the mysterious connection in the dark. Chapter 64. Just now, the prayer method that Hongjun had used to let Luo Fan sense his thoughts was not mysterious, and it was not a special cultivation technique. The reason why it could produce such a magical effect and be sensed by Luo Fan from millions of kilometers away was because Luo Fan had already attained the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, and Hong Jun was extremely respectful to Luo Fan. More importantly, it was because this was the primordial world. At this moment, the primordial world had just opened for a period of time. It was the time when Yin and Yang had just been judged. All the rules in the world had not been completely finalized. At this moment, even the primordial qi that was tainted with the aura of chaos had not completely evolved into connate primordial qi, let alone the other rules. In such an environment, all kinds of unbelievable things happened like normal things in the future. The kind of ordinary prayer that seemed to the future generations could produce such a magical effect. In the process, both Luo Fan and Hong Jun did not feel the slightest bit unusual. The technique that Luo Fan had passed to him through Hong Jun's prayer was not an offensive or defensive technique. Instead, it was a calming technique that was similar to the clear heart technique. Hong Jun had spent more than 20 years from millions of kilometers away from Buzhou Mountain. He had relied on his own feet and his own body to walk to Buzhou Mountain step by step. The insights and revelations he had obtained were definitely countless. However, among these realizations and revelations, the ones that he could grasp and quickly transform into his own realm and cultivation were only a small part of them. Most of the insights and revelations were buried deep in his heart, waiting for him to slowly cultivate and slowly dig them out in the following long period of time. The clear heart technique that Luo Fan had passed to him was a technique that dug out the insights and revelations in his heart. Through the cultivation of this technique, Hong Jun's heart would become purer and clearer, and his grasp of his heart would become more and more complete. In this process, he could constantly interrogate his heart, dig out his insights and revelations over the years, and transform them into his own realm and cultivation. According to Luo Fan's estimation, when Hong Jun could dig out 1/10 of these insights and revelations, he would almost be able to trigger the second tribulation and improve his strength greatly. If Hong Jun could dig out all the insights and revelations, he would at least be able to trigger the 8th tribulation. By then, he would only be one step away from attaining the Earth Immortal Tao fruit. "I hope you won't let me down," Luo Fan thought to himself. Thinking of this, he did not waste any time. He slowly closed his eyes, and his mind flowed through the nameless cultivation method. The Dharma in his body surged endlessly, producing a terrifying suction that crazily tore all the surrounding primordial qi. While Luo Fan was answering Hong Jun's prayers, the limitless void palace did not show any signs of stopping. It was still crazily absorbing the primordial qi. In just a short period of time, the primordial qi source had shrunk again. In order to fight for the primordial qi, Luo Fan naturally could not waste any time. Time was almost meaningless in the untainted world. In the blink of an eye, 50 years had passed. In these 50 years, Luo Fan's mind and consciousness were in a state of confusion. He seemed to be dreaming and awake. He seemed to be in a state of no man and no self. It was as if he had completely merged with the entire world. His body seemed to instinctively absorb the primordial qi, tearing all the primordial qi that could be found around him into his body, twisting and purifying it, and filling every unit of Dharma power. After a total of 60 years of absorption, Yang Qi was able to absorb the energy. This originally spherical primordial qi source with a diameter of more than 300 miles had been completely absorbed. At this time, Luo Fan was suspended in the spherical space of 300 miles in diameter. Yang. In front of him, the square-shaped limitless palace slowly rotated in the void. Its body flickered with a faint purple-yellow light. It was like lightning flashing, 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 and flashing. Luo Fan sat cross-legged in the void. His eyes were closed, and his expression was calm. His entire body seemed to have merged with the entire world. Outsiders could not feel any aura emanating from his body. If someone closed their eyes at this moment and just relied on their perception, they would not be able to feel his existence in that position. Phew! Luo Fan let out a long breath and slowly opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, there seemed to be two deep grayish-brown lights flashing in the spherical space of more than 300 miles in diameter. At the same time, the feeling of being one with the world and not emitting any aura completely disappeared. An unyielding aura emanated from his body and instantly filled the entire spherical space. Luo Fan slowly straightened his body. Pop, pop, pop sounds of air explosions erupted from his body at the same time. It was due to the strength of his body stretching that caused the air to explode. In the past 60 years, plus the 10 years before Hongjuan's prayer, he had gained a lot. Although his ability to absorb the Qi of Chaos was much weaker than that of the Limitless Palace, the amount of Qi of Chaos that he had absorbed in the past 60 years was incomparably huge. This huge amount of Qi of Chaos was enough to fill up a part of the 129,600 units of magic power in his body. He could easily feel a part of it. This allowed his strength to double, and his body's toughness to almost double as well. It's a pity that the increase in power does not depend on the amount of Qi of Chaos that I absorb. Luo Fan sensed the change in the magic power in his body and understood. The amount of Qi of Chaos that he absorbed this time was 2 to 3 times more than the previous time. After absorbing the Qi of Chaos, the feeling of fullness in the magic power in his body was much stronger. However, the increase in his power was far less than the previous time. The previous time was when he encountered the primordial stone of chaos. At that time, after he absorbed the source of Qi of Chaos, his power increased by 3 times. This kind of enlightenment allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the path of cultivation from now on. He raised his hand and the Limitless Palace shook slightly. It spun and came to his hand. When his mind and consciousness entered the Limitless Palace, Luo Fan instantly felt the changes in the Limitless Palace. Compared to Luo Fan's relatively slow increase in power, the changes in the Limitless Palace were huge. Although it was still unable to produce Qi of Chaos, the concentration of the Qi of Chaos that was between Qi of Chaos and primordial Qi that filled the mini-kiliacosm had increased by 2 to 3 times. According to this concentration, after condensing it, even if the time was sped up to 365 times, Luo Fan would still be able to cultivate a little. He would no longer be like before, where he could only maintain his own consumption. In addition, the body of the everlasting Void Palace was much stronger and purer than it was 60 years ago. During these years, not only did the everlasting Void Palace absorb the primal chaos energy, it also used the energy to refine its body. With a thought from Luo Fan, the limitless Void Palace dispersed and turned into a purple-yellow ray of light. With a sudden roll, it wrapped around Luo Fan's figure and rushed straight up into the ground. That speed was several times faster than 60 years ago. After a while, it brought Luo Fan's body out of the ground. Chapter 65. Standing in the void, in this world that he had not seen for 60 years, feeling the rich primordial Qi around him, Luo Fan counted with his fingers and realized that it had been 60 years and 76 days since he entered the underground world, more than 60 years. However, 60 years was equivalent to the blink of an eye in the untainted world. There was not much difference between the untainted world and the untainted world after 60 years. The whole world was still the same as what he had seen before he entered the underground world. Looking around and finding the direction, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed gently. The purple-yellow light, transformed by the Wuji Void Palace, rolled up his body and flew towards Buzhou Mountain, leaving a long shadow in the air. In his mind there was a very obvious target, Hongjun. Although he did not leave any mark on Hongju, don't forget that Hongjun had a magic weapon made by him. Although it was not intentional, the yellow-turbaned strongman emperor was made by him after all, so there must be his mark on it, so that Luo Fan could vaguely perceive its location. There was no doubt about the speed of the Wuji Void Palace. In a short while, it had already taken Luo Fan across millions of miles and arrived in front of Buzhou Mountain. It also allowed Luo Fan to really touch the special meaning of Buzhou Mountain. When the Wuji Void Palace stopped, put him on the ground, and returned to the world of consciousness, Luo Fan had already fallen into an indescribably mysterious state. Buzhou Mountain was the northwest pillar of the untainted world. It supported the endless starry sky nearly 100,000 miles above the northwest of the entire untainted world. It was transformed by Pangu's spine, containing the desolate and unyielding aura of Pangu, who created the world and contained endless mysteries. It could be said to be the most magical and precious thing in the untainted world. An indescribable epiphany appeared out of nowhere. Gradually, Luo Fan entered a hazy, half-awake state as if he was in Buzhou Mountain. At this moment, he only felt that he had become incomparably tall, incomparably strong, and contained endless power. His feet were on the ground, and his head was in the sky, as if he could do anything with ease. However, at the same time, there was an indescribable, terrifying pressure coming at him from above and below his feet. The two pressures were in complete opposite directions, confining him to the center of the room. Yang squeezed him crazily, trying to make him yield, make him bend over, make him lie down. This kind of feeling was very strange, very bitter, and very tragic. An indescribable sense of heroism rose in his heart. At the same time, a sense of responsibility for the safety of the entire world rose in his heart. It was as if as long as he retreated even a little bit, the entire world would welcome a calamity. As he entered this state, an extremely mysterious aura slowly emitted from his body. This aura seemed to be the same as the aura emitted by the surrounding Mount Buzhou, but it also seemed to be fundamentally different. It was like water Nai. For reasons known to all, the word Ryu could only be changed to Nai, blended together, and yet seemed to be completely different. When Li came out, it formed a sharp contrast with the aura of Buzhou Mountain. After an unknown period of time, Luo Fan slowly woke up from that state. As he woke up, the mysterious aura around his body intertwined and merged with the aura of Buzhou Mountain. Li's aura gradually turned into a vast and unyielding one. It was very similar to his previous aura, but there was an extremely subtle difference. Is this the legendary epiphany? Luo Fan opened his eyes and looked at the seemingly boundless Buzhou Mountain that was not far in front of him. His expression was somewhat inexplicable as he sighed. After going through that epiphany just now, the benefits he obtained were enormous. With a thought, a complicated and abstruse cultivation method flowed through his mind. Most of the cultivation method was the same as the nameless cultivation method, but it was the tiny difference that made the mysteries contained in this cultivation method one level higher than the nameless cultivation method. He silently recited the mantra of this cultivation method. The earthly immortal Tao fruit in his body collapsed and turned into a magical power that circled around the meridians in his body, forming an incomparably mysterious cycle. After 81 circulations, the magical power once again condensed in his lower abdomen dantian into a ball that expanded and contracted indefinitely, like a strange fruit. That was the earthly immortal Tao fruit, which contained countless mysteries and infinite power. However, this earthly immortal Tao fruit looked the same as before, but in reality, there were countless subtle differences. Although these differences were subtle, when combined, it produced an unbelievable change. It increased the earthly immortal Tao fruit by more than one level in all aspects. It became more mysterious, more unpredictable, and seemed to have more power. Furthermore, the connection with his divine soul had become even closer, and the amount of life essence it contained was even greater. I see. Luo Fan said these inexplicable words, and his face showed an incomparably satisfied expression. As for what he understood and what he gained, even he himself was not clear. He only knew that he seemed to have understood something extremely important, understood some kind of mystery, and got rid of some kind of shackles that were imposed on him and in his soul. In other words, his understanding of the Tao of the underworld had deepened. How could this be described with words? A kind of understanding arose in the depths of his soul. The benefits he gained this time could even benefit him for the next billions of years. Such a huge benefit naturally did not only change his Tao fruit. The divine soul in the sea of consciousness also underwent an inexplicable change. The Buzhou mountain formed by the divine soul became more detailed and complete. The vast and unyielding aura that it emitted was grander and more obvious. The aura was also mixed with some mysterious, indescribable aura. This mysterious aura intertwined with the vast and unyielding aura, resulting in a very mysterious change. It made the Buzhou mountains seem more solid, more majestic, and more magnificent. Because of the change in the divine soul, the entire sea of consciousness also underwent an inexplicable change. It became more real and more stable. The somewhat illusory, somewhat idealistic feeling faded a lot. The innate, inextinguishable divine light in the depths of the divine soul also produced a change that made Luo Fan overjoyed. Luo Fan had obtained this innate, inextinguishable divine light 60 years ago. At that time, this divine light was very repulsive to Luo Fan. It only knew how to struggle crazily after getting it, and was not willing to yield at all. As a result, Luo Fan could only suppress it in the depths of his divine soul, allowing this divine light to slowly familiarize itself with his aura and slowly accept him. Finally, after a long time, it eliminated its repulsive feeling. After 60 years of suppression, the effect was very ordinary, and the repulsive feeling was still very obvious. But at this time, unintentionally, the repulsive feeling of this innate, inextinguishable divine light for Luo Fan had decreased by nearly half. Chapter 66. Suddenly, Luo Fan's heart's blood flowed. He left the state of comprehending the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light and turned his head to look. He saw that at the foot of Buzhou mountain, tens of thousands of miles away, there was a black and green light rising into the sky. The light was lively, mighty, and extremely agile. It was like a dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Calculating with his fingers, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. This phenomenon would only appear when Hongjun had just passed his second tribulation. Hongjuan's second tribulation was the Gui Water Heavenly Wood Tribulation, which lasted for 1 day, 24 hours. During this period of time, Luo Fan happened to be in a state of epiphany. Therefore, Luo Fan, who was originally very agile, did not sense it. It wasn't until he left the state of epiphany and Hongjun passed the Gui Water Heavenly Wood Tribulation that he felt something. The epiphany just now seemed to have only lasted for a short while in Luo Fan's own eyes, but in reality, he had been standing there for more than a month. This was the reason why such a situation had occurred. Fortunately, with Hongjuan's strength and the magic treasures he had, it was definitely not a problem for him to pass the heavenly tribulation. Therefore, Luo Fan did not feel any fear or regret because he had missed Hongjuan's tribulation. He did not use the power of the magic treasures to fly. With a thought, he turned into a long rainbow and flew towards a location tens of thousands of miles away. After all, it was only tens of thousands of miles. For Luo Fan's strength, he could cover it in a breath's time. The difference between using magic treasures and not using magic treasures was probably just a few blinks of the eye. The difference was not big, so there was no need. Soon, the long rainbow arrived at the place where the light burst out. It suddenly fell and condensed, turning into the figure of Luo Fan again. If this place was somewhere else, it would be a small depression, but at the foot of Buzhou mountain, it was like a huge valley. The lush vegetation covered every corner of the valley. Hongjun was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the valley. Yang's body exuded a misty green and black radiance. These rays of light enveloped his body and shot straight up into the sky, reaching a height of 10,000 feet. They expanded and contracted unpredictably, like a spiritual dragon. The light that Luo Fan saw before was this light. With a step, he crossed a distance of several miles and arrived 10 feet in front of Hongjun. This place was outside the range of his light. With a move of his mind, a mantra flowed through Luo Fan's mind. With the appearance of this mantra, 2 rays of golden brilliance shrouded Hongjun's figure. Instantly, the situation in Hongjun's body and sea of consciousness appeared in his eyes and flowed through his mind. At this time, the energy in Hongjun's body was undergoing a transformation. The number of strands mixed in it increased, and they were distributed more finely. They were entangled and stuck together more, and could be maintained for a longer period of time. Through the entanglement of these strands, Luo Fan could gradually see what form these strands wanted to take. It was also the core of Hongjun's cultivation after attaining the fruit of Tao. With a slight movement of his mind, countless lines intertwined in his mind, and finally turned into a complicated and abstruse three-dimensional talisman in his mind. This three-dimensional talisman had a strange shape. It looked like a bundle of short bamboo slips made up of countless jade strips that were connected together into a bundle. Looking at this talisman, an inexplicable feeling emerged in his heart. It seemed familiar but also absurd. Jade Archive of Fate. Is this the so-called Jade Archive of Fate? An archive was an item that was made up of bamboo or wooden slip. It was an item that recorded words. If this kind of archive was made of jade, it would naturally be a jade archive. According to the legends, Hongjun had a spiritual treasure of enlightenment that was created by the heavens and earth, the Jade Archive of Fate. With all these things combined, there was no longer any doubt as to what form this talisman would take. I didn't expect that unknowingly, it would coincide with the legends. I originally thought that the art of supporting heaven and earth would make his cultivation path different. Unfortunately, Luo Fan smiled bitterly. However, this bitter smile only lasted for a short while. Although it was different from what he had expected, it still seemed like a good thing. Three-dimensional talismans in the shape of jade archives of creation condensed within Hongjun's energy. Not long after, they crumbled and dispersed, turning back into strands of silk. They twisted and intertwined with each other, trying to reassemble themselves. Luo Fan stood there quietly. The golden light in his eyes was like a searchlight that enveloped Hongjun's body. He carefully observed every change in Hongjun's body. After a while, he turned his attention to Hongjun's sea of consciousness. Every time he went through a heavenly tribulation, Hongjun's sea of consciousness would undergo a huge change. This time was no exception. In Luo Fan's eyes, Hongjun's sea of consciousness had doubled in size. Now it was already the size of 4 football fields. Sitting cross-legged in the middle of the sea of consciousness, his divine soul appeared to be even more solid. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the sea of consciousness, continuously extracting the energy that seeped into his sea of consciousness from a mysterious location. This allowed the energy to enter and leave his spirit continuously, constantly undergoing slight changes. However, this time, Hongjun did not show any signs of impatience on his spirit. It was just a simple extraction and conversion. Even though the threads would collapse after a short while after condensing into a jade archive of good fortune, as if all his efforts were in vain, he didn't show any signs of regret. His state of mind was shockingly calm. With the previous experience, in addition to the improvement of his realm and cultivation, he could clearly understand himself. He knew that it was already very rare for him to be able to do this with his current strength. He also knew that if he were to force it, it would not benefit his cultivation at all. Instead, it would harm him. Looking at Hongjun's unhurried cultivation, neither arrogant nor impatient, Luo Fan could not help but nod to himself. He dispersed the golden light in his eyes and began to move his mind. Spots of spiritual light flickered in his mind. After a short while, countless complicated words and diagrams continuously burst forth in his mind. They continuously regrouped, and finally condensed into a mysterious cultivation method. Luo Fan carefully comprehended this cultivation method. After modifying dozens of inappropriate parts, he suddenly focused and condensed the countless complicated words and diagrams into a spot of spiritual light. He raised his hand and pointed at the space between Hongjuan's eyebrows. This spot of spiritual light suddenly shot out of his finger, traversed a distance of 100 feet, and went straight into the space between Hongjuan's eyebrows. Through a mysterious location, it rushed straight into the world of his sea of consciousness. Suddenly, this spot of spiritual light collapsed and exploded, turning into countless complicated words and diagrams. One by one, they entered Hongjuan's spirit. This is Creation Jade Archive Technique. Master is here. A thought appeared in Hongjuan's mind. In an instant, he understood what was going on, and his mind became calmer in the blink of an eye. Luo Fan rarely named his own cultivation method and secret arts, because it was meaningless. In any case, he was cultivating it by himself. Could it be that naming it would make the cultivation method more mysterious? Hence, he only used its function to describe cultivation methods, such as the mind-reading technique, the X-ray eyes, and the like to describe them. As for the cultivation methods that he wanted to impart to Hongjun, he would give each of them a name that sounded very mysterious and appropriate. Of course, this was not because he was joking, but because he wanted to strengthen Hongjuan's desire to cultivate so that he would not slack off because this cultivation method did not have a famous name. This cultivation method was the same. Moreover, the name that he gave was extremely suitable for Hongjun. Creation. Jade Butterfly. So it's creation. I understand. An indescribable joy surged in Hongjuan's heart, as though the fog in his heart had been pushed away by a big hand. Chapter 67. Hongjun had only glanced at the name of the Jade Archive of Creation, and he felt that he had gained a lot. In reality, with Hongjuan's current strength, cultivation, and realm, it would be **T for him to know the level of existence of the magical power unit that he had condensed, what kind of power it would possess, and what its true meaning was. The reason why Hongjun wanted to condense the energy in his body into a magical power unit in the shape of the Jade Archive of Creation was more of an instinct, and an idea that was inspired by the true meaning contained in the technique of indomitable spirit. In the process of condensing and transforming the magical power units in a cultivator's body, the cultivation method only played a guiding role in the process of condensing the magical power unit. What truly determined the form of the magical power unit, and what kind of mystery it was the true meaning that the cultivator had comprehended from the cultivation method. Just like Luo Fan himself, the reason why the magical power units in his body condensed into the form of Buzhou Mountain was because he had comprehended from Buzhou Mountain the willpower of never yielding, never giving up, unwavering, and overcoming all difficulties to reach his goal. These various willpower were the main reason why his magical power unit had transformed into such a form. It was the same for Hongjun. Although the technique of indomitable spirit that he cultivated was greatly different from the original after being modified and deepened by Luo Fan, its essence was still the cultivation method that he had comprehended from watching Pangu supporting the heaven and earth. 10,000 people watching the same thing could produce 10,000 completely different comprehensions. Only the cultivator himself would know what he had comprehended. No matter how strong and how much an outsider understood him, it was impossible for him to know what he had comprehended. Just like Hongjun, what he had comprehended from Pangu was Pangu's willpower to create the heaven and earth. This was something that Luo Fan did not know. And this willpower to create the heaven and earth was also the true meaning of the technique of indomitable spirit to Hongjun. Because of this, what Hongjun condensed was the Jade Archive of indomitable spirit that could best describe the true meaning of creation in the world. In the past, Hong Jun only knew how to condense energy according to his instincts and guide these energy threads to link and take shape. However, because he lacked the understanding of the true meaning of creation, it was chaotic and difficult to take shape. At this time, the cultivation method that Luo Fan passed to him contained a huge amount of mystery and was unfathomable. However, the most useful thing to Hong Jun was the word creation in the name. In the blink of an eye, Hong Jun felt that his heart had become much clearer, as if he had understood his true heart and his true self. A faint sense of satisfaction arose in his heart. Activating the cultivation method, the mantra and the route of the cultivation method flowed through his mind. I see. The process of condensing magical energy can be divided into 9 parts. Through cultivation, all the energy will be condensed and transformed, and the Tao fruit will be attained. Hong Jun's mind was in a state similar to great enlightenment. In a breath, he saw a straight path leading to the Earth Immortal's Tao fruit. The Jade Archive of Creation technique was divided into 9 levels. When the 9 levels were perfected, all the energy in Hong Jun's body could be condensed into a 3-dimensional talisman in the shape of the Jade Archive of Creation. Finally, the Earth Immortal's Tao fruit would be attained. The Jade Archive of Creation was a mysterious spiritual treasure that was formed by 129,600 jade slips. It contained the infinite Tao of creation of the heaven and earth, and its power was extremely shocking. This kind of 3-dimensional talisman in the shape of the Jade Archive of Creation naturally had to contain 129,600 relative Tao. Only the Li part could be used. The Jade Archive of Creation technique that Luo Fan created was based on this essence of the Jade Archive of Creation. Once the first level of this cultivation method was perfected, the energy in the body could condense a large number of jade slips that were woven from 100 jade slips. The number of jade slips condensed in the second level remained the same, but the number of jade slips that formed the jade slips was twice that of the first level, 200 pieces. The number of jade slips condensed in the third level also remained the same, but the number of jade slips that formed the jade slips was 3 times that of the second level, 600 pieces. Thus, the number of jade slips condensed did not change, but the number of jade slips that formed the jade slips alternated according to odd and even multiples, just like the conversion of yin and yang. Finally, at the 9th level, the jade slips condensed would each be woven from 129,600 jade slips, forming a complete 3-dimensional talisman. Luo Fan estimated that, based on Hong Jun's current cultivation base, he could at least cultivate this cultivation method to the 2nd level. As for the subsequent levels, they would coincide with the heavenly tribulation. In other words, every time he went through a heavenly tribulation, he would cultivate 1 level. When he finished going through the 9 heavenly tribulations, he would have perfected the 9 levels. This was not the result of Luo Fan deliberately controlling the progress. Instead, it was because this cultivation method corresponded with some mysterious principle, which was why it could correspond with the heavenly tribulation and was formed naturally. Hong Jun read through this cultivation method, and his respect for Luo Fan rose to another level. If he continued cultivating according to this cultivation method, as long as he mastered the first level, he would be able to obtain some divine powers that only itinerant immortals had in advance. Although these divine powers were definitely not as powerful as real itinerant immortals, they were still many times stronger than what he had now. The incantation for the cultivation method flowed through his mind, and he controlled the energy in his body to slowly circulate according to the cultivation method's route. At this moment, his body was enveloped in a layer of black and green light. This light was full of vitality and spirituality, constantly replenishing the energy in his body and nourishing his flesh. This was the Gui water essence and E-wood essence left behind by the Gui water heavenly wood tribulation. They were some of the benefits he had obtained after going through the tribulation. As this cultivation method circulated, The energy in Hong Jun's body continuously condensed and compressed. Although the Gui water essence and E-wood essence were replenishing it, the energy shrank too quickly. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk to half its original size. The number of threads within it continued to increase, quickly intertwining and intertwining. Gradually, they formed pieces of gray jade slip-shaped three-dimensional talismans, floating and flowing within the energy. After these jade slips were formed, they gradually gathered and continuously weaved together, forming three-dimensional talismans that looked like jade archive. The process of forming the three-dimensional talismans in the shape of jade slips and weaving the talismans together took a full 3 days. After 3 days, the threads had already formed 12,960 jade archives that were formed from 100 jade slips. However, at the same time, after these three-dimensional talismans were formed, the energy in Hong Jun's body had been reduced by nearly half. Shockingly, in just 3 days, Hong Jun had successfully cultivated the first level of the creation Jade Archive technique. To Luo Fan, 3 days was equivalent to the blink of an eye. In these 3 days, he had been standing at a position that was 30 meters away from Hong Jun, quietly watching Hong Jun cultivate there. Seeing that Hong Jun had only spent 3 days to cultivate the first level, Luo Fan was very satisfied. After all, this cultivation method was quite profound, and the essence contained within it was extremely profound. Without extraordinary talent, it was impossible to cultivate it in a short period of time. However, after 3 days, the dark green light emitted from Hong Jun's body had gradually weakened and shrunk. At this moment, only a thin layer of light was left covering his body. Seeing this, Luo Fan understood that the benefits brought to Hong Jun by the Gui water heavenly wood tribulation were about to be used up by him. In other words, the energy in this position would soon be unable to satisfy Hong Jun's cultivation. The valley that Hong Jun chose was very quiet, and there was no chaotic vitality source. Chaotic vitality source was very common on Buzhou Mountain. To be able to choose this place, Hong Jun had considered his state of being full of energy but insufficient realm. It was a very wise decision. However, this decision had obstructed him at this moment. This was because cultivating the creation Jade Archive technique required a huge amount of chaotic vitality to achieve the best cultivation effect. With a thought, Luo Fan had already discovered the existence of a small chaotic vitality source more than 1,000 miles away. It was naturally far from enough for him to cultivate, but it was enough to support Hong Jun's cultivation. With a thought, the void Wuji Palace appeared above his head. With a turn, it turned into a purplish-yellow light that covered Hong Jun's body. Then, the purplish-yellow light suddenly flashed, and had already brought Hong Jun to the chaotic vitality source that was being suppressed by the stone. With a light touch, the stone had already disappeared, and was stored into the void Wuji Palace. The stone disappeared, and chaotic vitality gushed out, instantly enveloping Hong Jun. Activate the technique of supporting heaven and earth to absorb. The creation Jade Archive technique requires a huge amount of energy to be activated, so I can't be impatient. With a thought, Luo Fan's divine ability appeared, and he had already transmitted his thoughts into Hong Jun's mind. This thought came at the right time. It was just when the black and green light disappeared together, and Hong Jun felt that if he continued to cultivate, he might be a little hesitant. I said that I would update one more chapter in the middle of the night, so I desperately updated at 3:23 a.m. Chapter 68. Suddenly, Luo Fan's expression changed slightly, as though he had sensed something. He raised his head and looked towards the east of Buzhou Mountain. However, in the blink of an eye, his expression returned to normal. He turned his head and focused his attention on Hong Jun. After Luo Fan's thought entered Hong Jun's mind, Hong Jun's expression gradually became peaceful. His body also produced a strong suction force, continuously absorbing the primordial energy emitted by the primordial energy source into his body. Luo Fan revealed a faint smile on his face. After all, the feeling of watching the teacher of a sage and the teacher of heaven and earth improve bit by bit under his guidance was really intoxicating. Especially when the teacher of a sage and the teacher of heaven and earth was very obedient, that feeling was even more wonderful. Hong Jun circulated the energy in his body, which was already in the form of mana, according to the circulation route of the technique of supporting heaven and earth. His mind and thoughts were even chanting the mantra of the technique of supporting heaven and earth. In an instant, he had already entered the cultivation state of the technique of supporting heaven and earth. As he entered this state, the speed at which the primordial energy around him was absorbed became faster. More and more primordial energy was drawn into his body, and it was continuously scattered, crushed, and purified by his energy. In the end, it was completely integrated into the energy. The amount of energy kept increasing. Luo Fan checked carefully for a while and was completely at ease. There was nothing special about the next step. He only needed to cultivate for a long time, continuously absorb, and strengthen the energy in his body so that it could reach the level required to cultivate the Jade Archive technique of creation. There were no problems or obstacles in between, but there was no need for him to watch from the side. However, this step was, after all, a very important and crucial step for Hong Jun. Hence, Luo Fan did not dare to neglect it. He gently raised his hand and waved. The purplish-yellow light in the surroundings suddenly condensed and turning into the Wuji Palace in the void again. "Where is Wuji, child?" Luo Fan shouted softly. His voice was rather dignified. "The limitless boy is here and will listen to master's orders." An emotionless voice resounded. Then, a fair-skinned boy rushed out of the limitless palace. He suddenly sank down and landed in front of Luo Fan, bowing as if he was showing some respect. "Seal the surrounding area of 100 miles. Don't let any external force disturb Hongjuan's cultivation," Luo Fan ordered faintly. "Understood." The limitless boy bowed. His respectful posture and emotionless voice formed a sharp contrast, causing the scene to seem rather strange. After he finished speaking, his body trembled and he drilled into the everlasting Void Palace. Then, the limitless Void Palace suddenly exploded, turning into a rolling purplish-yellow cloud. It suddenly collapsed and instantly covered a radius of 100 miles around the chaotic Yuan Qi source. When this purplish-yellow cloud was condensed, it looked quite obvious and thick. However, when it was dispersed within a radius of 100 kilometers, it seemed extremely faint, almost to the point where it was almost undetectable. It only made the environment within a radius of 100 kilometers look a little different from the environment in other places. Luo Fan felt the space within a radius of 100 miles and found that the space within a radius of 100 miles seemed to be completely isolated. It existed in the primordial world. A feeling of self-sufficiency came into his mind. This was the sign of this world being sealed. It was the feeling that this world could only have when it was isolated from the primordial world. After sensing it, Luo Fan was very satisfied. He shook his body and turned into a long rainbow, flying to a place more than 10,000 miles away in the east. That was the place where he had sensed the abnormality before. When he came to a place more than 10,000 miles away from the Hongjun group, the long rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into sank and landed on a huge stone. This big stone looked quite ordinary. The material and shape were all the same. The only commendable thing was probably its size. It was extremely huge, with a diameter of 10,000 feet. Under its reflection, Luo Fan's figure was even smaller than an ant. It was rare for an ordinary stone to reach such a size, even in the primordial world. Most of this big stone was underground, but the small part that was exposed was already like a hill. Its surface was not very smooth, and there were not many strange bumps. It was grayish-brown, and there was a faint aura of chaos on it. This was very common in the primordial world, when the world had just been created and yin and yang had just been separated. It should be here. Luo Fan stood on the top of the stone and thought to himself. He didn't choose this place at random, and he didn't come here to play. Instead, when he brought Hong Jun to the source of chaotic vitality, he suddenly sensed that there seemed to be a very weak and obscure spiritual sense reaction below this place. This spiritual sense was not only obscure and weak, but also very slow. Because of this, the limitless boy, who was always sensing the abnormality around, did not sense the existence of this spiritual sense. Luo Fan had the earthly immortal's Tao fruit. Although his sensing range was not as good as the limitless boy's, his sensitivity and meticulousness were not comparable to the limitless boy's. Therefore, Luo Fan could discover the existence of this spiritual sense, but the limitless boy could not. Luo Fan stood on top of the stone, and a mnemonic chant flowed through his mind. 2 golden lights shot out from his eyes and shrouded the somewhat exaggeratedly huge stone. It's really here. Luo Fan's X-ray vision was very mysterious. In the blink of an eye, he had seen through the whole big stone and the location of the spiritual sense. It was a fist-sized ball of light. It was crystal clear and bright like water. It contracted and contracted, looking like a beating heart. Waves of faint life chi seeped out from it, completely isolating this ball of light from ordinary object. No one would mistake it for a dead object. Such a strange spiritual sense. It's really wonderful. Luo Fan looked at this spiritual sense and exclaimed in his heart. Among the spiritual senses he encountered, even the strange trees that did not have a complete spiritual sense had a physical body. This spiritual sense was particularly strange. It only had the shape of a ball of light. It was tangible but not tangible. It did not look like an innate god. Instead, it looked like the cloud-shaped creatures in the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer. Let's communicate with it. After Luo Fan scanned it a few times, his mind moved slightly. As he thought about it, a mantra flowed through his mind. It was the mantra of his mind connection technique. When this magical power was used, Luo Fan felt that his mind seemed to be connected with a very obscure, very slow, and very vague mind. Luo Fan had experienced this kind of connection several times. Naturally, he would not lose his mind. He transmitted his goodwill to that mind through this thought. After waiting for a long time, almost when Luo Fan thought that this spiritual sense was very incomplete and did not even know how to respond to the situation in the outside world, the spiritual sense finally responded. So happy, so full. The thought transmitted by the spiritual sense was like a baby learning to speak, word by word, intermittently. Do you have a name? Luo Fan transmitted this thought. Name. What is that thing? Similarly, after a long time, the strand of spiritual sense finally conveyed this thought. Since your spiritual sense was born, the first word that appeared in your mind was your name. My name comes from this is my name, then my name is Mountain God Buzhou. The thought transmitted by the spiritual sense was still intermittent at first, but the last 4 words were connected, forming an effect like a thunderbolt in Luo Fan's mind. Buzhou Mountain God. Luo Fan had made countless guesses, but he had never thought that this spiritual sense would have such an identity. Chapter 69. Buzhou Mountain was the backbone of Penghu and the primordial sky pillar. It was out of Luo Fan's expectation that there would be a mountain god in such a miraculous mountain. However, the title of mountain god sounded good, but in fact it was just a restraint. Even though he was in charge of Buzhou Mountain, the miraculous mountain in the world, his nature could not be changed. In just a moment, Luo Fan, who was addicted to taking disciples, gave up the idea of taking him as a disciple. He decided to maintain a good relationship with the god of Buzhou Mountain, but he would never take him as a disciple. What was the use of taking a disciple who was bound and restrained? Such a big change happened in his mind in less than a blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan had decided his way of dealing with the god of Buzhou Mountain. I don't think you have any cultivation method. I have a method that can help you transform. I'm willing to exchange the right to control the top of Buzhou Mountain with you. Are you willing? Luo Fan transmitted his thought into the mind of the god of Buzhou Mountain through his mind connection stone. He believed that as the god of Buzhou Mountain, he must have some kind of control over Buzhou Mountain. The only difference was the degree of control. Shape-shifting. I want to shape-shift. I can do this. After understanding his own origin, mountain god Buzhou's consciousness became much more agile. His thoughts were no longer conveyed word by word like before, and his reactions were not as slow as before. So simple and adorable. This was the first thought that came to Luo Fan's mind. But this was naturally the best for him. Moreover, he would not let the god of Buzhou Mountain suffer losses. With a thought, countless complicated and abstruse characters and patterns intertwined and rotated, gradually combining into a magic formula that contained endless mysteries. It condensed into a spiritual light and suddenly rushed into the god of Buzhou Mountain's spiritual consciousness. It exploded, turned into memories, and completely integrated with the god of Buzhou Mountain. Great Path of God. An indescribable joy came from the god of Buzhou Mountain's spiritual consciousness. Luo Fan, who was connected to it through his mind connection stone, felt an indescribable joy in his heart. For you. After the joy, the god of Buzhou Mountain sent out a thought. Along with this thought, there was a spot of light that was as clear as water. This spot of light slowly split from its body and separated. At this moment, an indescribable pain was transmitted to Luo Fan's soul through his mind connection stone. At the sight of it, Luo Fan knew that the god of Buzhou Mountain was cutting off a part of his body that represented the authority to control the peak of Buzhou Mountain. This was equivalent to cutting off one's limbs. It was definitely a very painful feeling. Similarly, it also meant that as long as this spot of light was absorbed into one's body, one would be able to gain the authority to control the peak of Buzhou Mountain. The god of Buzhou Mountain, who had lost this spot of light, would also lose the authority to control the peak of Buzhou Mountain. It seems that I've gained a great advantage. Luo Fan could not help but feel a headache coming on. Initially, he only wanted the god of Buzhou Mountain to bestow the authority to him. He did not want to seize the authority to control the peak of Buzhou Mountain. The reward he offered was only for the granting of the authority. The Great Way of Enlightened God was a cultivation method that Luo Fan had created based on the abilities that a deity should have and the characteristics that an enlightened God should have in his memory. Its profoundness and complexity were needless to say. When it was cultivated to perfection, one would be able to achieve the supreme enlightened God position. By then, Buzhou Mountain would become one's absolute territory. In this territory, one would be almost omnipotent and obtain an immortal life. Moreover, one could absorb the belief that all living things in the world had for Buzhou Mountain to grow. In the end, one could obtain the strength that was similar to the peak of the earthly immortal realm. Such a cultivation method was naturally enough to exchange for the authority to control the peak of Buzhou Mountain. In fact, it might even be slightly more than that. However, if it was exchanged for seizing the authority to control the peak of Buzhou Mountain, it was far from enough. It was a great advantage for him. Sighing, Luo Fan took the light that was as clear as water. He did not put it into his body. Instead, he covered it with his left hand and put it into the world in the sleeve. With a slight movement of his mind, countless complicated and abstruse characters condensed and recombined in his mind. In the end, they turned into a mental cultivation method that was made up of over 300 characters. The mental cultivation method suddenly condensed and turned into a divine light. Through the connection of his mind connection, it was transmitted into the spiritual consciousness of the god of Buzhou Mountain. It suddenly exploded and turned into a memory that merged with the god of Buzhou Mountain. When the mental cultivation method of over 300 characters merged into his body, the body of the god of Buzhou Mountain, which was as clear as water, suddenly shook violently. An indescribable shock and gratitude flowed into Luo Fan's soul through the connection of his mind connection. Luo Fan sighed and said, "This method is only a possibility. Whether or not it will succeed, I'm afraid it will depend on your luck." When he was done talking, he did not care how grateful the god of Buzhou Mountain was. He retracted the mind connection, and with a shake of his body, he transformed into a long beam of light and darted toward the southeast. Before long, he landed in front of a cave over 100 miles away. Although the mental cultivation method he transmitted into the spiritual consciousness of the god of Buzhou Mountain was only about 300 characters, it was at least 10 times more precious than the great way of deity. It was because it was the art of deity transcendence, a mental cultivation method that could allow the god of Buzhou Mountain to have a chance of transcendence after cultivating it. Of course, it was just a chance. He still needed to spend a great deal of effort and great luck to be able to transcend the position of a mountain god. Luo Fan's knowledge and strength were not enough for him to create a cultivation method that could allow a god like the mountain god to escape. If he had such an ability, with his addiction to taking in disciples, he would not let go of such a good disciple like the god of Buzhou Mountain. After all, the god of Buzhou Mountain had the authority to control the entire Buzhou Mountain. If he took Luo Fan as his disciple, Luo Fan's authority would be equal to his. Why would he need to exchange a cultivation method for the authority to control the mountaintop? Although it was just a chance for the god of Buzhou Mountain, it meant that there was hope for him to reach the Great Way, and he had the chance to obtain the god of Z. That was why the god of Buzhou Mountain, who had just understood his origin, was so shocked and grateful. The cave that Luo Fan had fallen into had a primal chaos origin energy source. At this moment, the primal chaos origin energy was gurgling out of the cave. The primal chaos origin energy was like a gray mist that was constantly gushing out of the cave. Because of the special nature of Buzhou Mountain, the source of chaotic energy was distributed closer to Buzhou Mountain. When he reached the top of Buzhou Mountain, the source of chaotic energy could be seen almost everywhere. Luo Fan had seen a lot of it when he came to Buzhou Mountain to meet Hongjun. Naturally, he knew about it. Therefore, he was not picky. As long as he needed it, he would use it without being picky. After falling into the entrance of the cave, Luo Fan's mind moved. He already knew that the primal chaos yuan qi source was less than 1,000 feet deep in the cave. It was neither too big nor too small for him to cultivate for a long time, but it was enough for him to do what he wanted to do. Luo Fan took a step forward. With just one step, he crossed 1,000 feet and arrived at the source of chaotic energy. It was embedded in the depths of the cave. Most of it was wrapped in the mountain rocks, and only a small part stuck to the wall like a protruding hill. Luo Fan measured it and found that the exposed size was just enough to be covered by his back. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. A small platform rose from the ground and extended to the protruding hill. He took a step forward and sat cross-legged on the platform. His back was stuck to the part of the cave wall where the source of chaotic energy came from. With a thought, his body produced a strong suction force. The source of chaotic energy dispersed by the source of chaotic energy was madly absorbed by him and poured into his body. He stretched out his hand gently, and a light as clear as water appeared in his hand. It was the existence that he had obtained from the god of Buzhou Mountain, which represented the authority to control the summit of Buzhou Mountain. Chapter 70. The light, which was as clear as water, was very mysterious and had the power to move anyone's heart. However, Luo Fan did not intend to take it into his body. Although it seemed appropriate and had endless benefits, it contained very obscure dangers and restrictions. Because if he did so, he could have absolute control over the top of Buzhou Mountain, and could even change the topography, environment, and even the weather at the top of Buzhou Mountain at will. He was almost like the owner of Mount Buzhou, but at the same time, he also had a close and almost inseparable connection with the top of Mount Bujo. This connection would in turn restrict him. Even if it could not restrict him as tightly as it could restrict the god of Bujo Mountain and make him unable to leave Bujo Mountain, it would definitely have some strong or weak restraints on his mind. And this, for Luo Fan, whose heart was concerned with the great Tao, was almost fatal with a thought. He waved his left hand and covered his sleeve. In the blink of an eye, dozens of materials came out of the sleeve and were restrained by an invisible force. They floated in the air and slowly floated around the light that was as clear as water. These materials were naturally collected by Luo Fan on his way to the Yellow Spring when Hong Jun was going through his first heavenly tribulation. There were many kinds of materials, but they were enough to refine several powerful celestial devices. Looking at these materials, Luo Fan's mind flashed. He was thinking carefully and deducing how to refine this celestial device. After a while, he had already thought of what kind of celestial device to refine, what materials to use, and what methods to use. Even the final form of the celestial device was floating in his mind. After making up his mind, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The earthly immortal Tao fruit suddenly sucked in the primordial qi that kept pouring into his body from his back, and released it. It turned into a faint gray flame and spurted out from his palm. The primordial qi that poured into his back was endless, so naturally, the gray flame was endless as well. It kept spurting out and producing. This gray flame was not the heavenly fire, extraordinary fire, earth fire, wood fire, stone fire, or any other strange fire. It was the Taoist fire. It was a mysterious flame triggered by the fruit of Tao and ignited with the primordial qi as the fuel. This flame was very mysterious and profound. It was more profound than any other flame. It could be used to attack and burn mountains and boil seas. But that was not the greatest effect of the Taoist fire. The greatest effect of the Taoist fire was in refining weapons. After using it to refine a material, its grade would increase by one level. Above that, there would be a formless life force, and there would be more chances for it to produce spiritual sense. In other words, the materials refined with the Taoist fire would have more opportunities to become magic treasures. For a magic tool, this kind of opportunity was equivalent to giving an ordinary person a chance to become an immortal. It was a kind of power that could be recreated. In the primordial world, the refining of Dharma artifacts and Dharma treasures was not like in some novels. One had to use flames to refine and extract essence to refine. Because of this, Luo Fan had refined 4 or 5 magic treasures, but this was the first time that the Taoist fire, which was most suitable for refining weapons, had appeared. Because of this, Luo Fan had refined 4 or 5 magic treasures, but this was the first time that the Taoist fire, which was most suitable for refining weapons, had appeared. He raised his hand and patted the air. The Taoist fire instantly surged over and wrapped all the materials in the blink of an eye. Then, the materials melted and collapsed at a speed that was almost visible to the naked eye. Among them, countless impurities were converted and burned, turning into invisible smoke and dissipating. However, the heat emitted by the Taoist fire did not leak out at all. Instead, it was restrained to the extreme, and the heat was completely focused on the materials. Even Luo Fan, who was extremely close to the Taoist fire, did not feel the slightest bit of heat. What he felt was that the surrounding environment was still so cool, and it was no different from before. Earth essence, chaotic essence iron, blood river origin, unrefined gold steel, topaz crystal. The 36 different materials that Luo Fan had taken out gradually merged into one. The light that was as clear as water was completely wrapped in it, and it could no longer be seen. The liquid ball was half the size of a person. It was chaotic, as if it was made up of countless materials, but it also seemed to be an extremely pure and condensed substance. It was very mysterious. The ball of liquid was condensed from the 36 materials. However, after being refined by the Tao fire, it had a faint, almost imperceptible life force compared to those materials. This made the liquid ball no longer look like an ordinary dead object. Instead, it had become an embryo that was pregnant with life. It was mysterious and wonderful. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind moved. Complicated and mysterious talismans suddenly flowed through his mind. Then, through a mysterious mechanism, they were suddenly drawn out and thrown into the liquid ball. They quickly collapsed, quickly shuttled, and quickly reorganized. Gradually, they formed layers of complicated and mysterious restrictions. The talismans kept being thrown in, and the restrictions kept being formed. As the layers of restrictions took shape, countless profound lines flashed on the surface of the liquid sphere, forming a mysterious pattern. At the same time, its size was constantly shrinking, and there were even wisps of invisible mist being emitted from it, dispersing in all directions. Time passed day by day. After 7 by 749 Ri, the liquid ball had been compressed and condensed into a palm-sized talisman. It was as thin as a card, but as soft as cotton. It floated in the gray Taoist fire. This talisman emitted a golden brilliance. On its surface there was a pattern that was so complicated that it would make people dizzy. At the same time, it was also very meaningful. It looked very sacred and extremely mysterious. Luo Fan, who had not stopped refining after 7 by 749 Ri, let out a long breath. He raised his hand and the talisman floated into his hand. As he clenched his right hand, the Taoist fire wrapped around it instantly collapsed and eventually disappeared without a trace. After the Tao fire disappeared, the powerful suction force that had been in his body for the past 49 Ri suddenly disappeared. The chaotic vital qi no longer surged into his body. Instead, it dissipated in all directions and gradually filled the cave. Obviously, after 49 days of continuous refinement by the Taoist fire, coupled with the countless talismans that he had put in, this magic weapon had been completed. After sensing it slightly, the layers of restrictions contained in this talisman appeared in his mind. 36. This was the number of restrictions contained in this talisman. These restrictions were exactly the same as the yellow-turbaned strongman emperor. Of course, in fact, the power of the two was similar to a certain extent. They were both only one step away from becoming magic treasures, although, because of the different directions, the power of the two could not be compared after they became magic treasures. Of course, even though it seemed like a small step, it was definitely not an easy step to cross. Like the Void Wuji Palace, they could obtain mysterious materials like the primordial Chaos Stone, refine them, and integrate them into it. Then, they would naturally become magic treasures. Otherwise, they could only rely on a long time to nourish and refine it. Finally, it would give birth to a treasure spirit of its own. Only then could it become a magic treasure. During this period of time, even if they spent all their effort on it, it would take at least several yuan hui. Luo Fan held this talisman and felt the power of the talisman. He was very satisfied. He was not in the mood to nourish and refine it. Relatively speaking, the power of this talisman was enough for him to use. This talisman contained 36 restrictions. It had completely integrated and strengthened the light that was separated from the body of the god of Buzhou Mountain. At this moment, this talisman represented the control authority of the top of Buzhou Mountain. It even had a certain processing ability, just like a computer. Luo Fan only needed to input a little bit of his will. He did not even need to think about how to achieve it, and this talisman would automatically change the top of Buzhou Mountain. In the blink of an eye, it would transform into the shape he wanted. Luo Fan's mind moved. He inserted his will into this talisman. In an instant, a golden light appeared in his mind. Through this golden light, Luo Fan felt that there seemed to be something far above him that had an extremely close connection with him. A feeling of extreme longing to converge with that thing filled the entire ball of light, and along with Luo Fan's thoughts, it was conveyed to his mind. So this is the restriction. Fortunately, I did not absorb it into my body. Luo Fan's mind moved. He got out of this state and his senses returned to normal. The feeling of extreme longing to go up was naturally brought about by this talisman. It represented the influence of the divine light of the god of Buzhou Mountain. If he absorbed it into his body, the person who was longing to go up to the top of Buzhou Mountain would probably become Luo Fan. Chapter 71. He raised his hand and waved it lightly. The golden talisman had already rushed straight into the universe in his sleeve and was stored away. After collecting the talismans, Luo Fan's body flashed and he appeared outside the cave. He raised his head and looked at the location of Buzhou Mountain God. He could feel an extremely mysterious aura emanating from there, shooting straight into the sky. This mysterious aura seemed to have a close connection with Buzhou Mountain, but it also seemed to have a vague but increasingly strong repulsion with Buzhou Mountain. As soon as he sensed this mysterious aura, Luo Fan understood that the god of Buzhou Mountain was practicing the great way of God and the transcending art of God at the same time. Only in this way could such an aura be emitted from that location. If you weren't the god of Buzhou Mountain, I would have taken you in as my disciple. What a pity! Luo Fan sighed inwardly after he sensed it. The decision of the god of Buzhou Mountain to cultivate both the great Tao technique and the transcendence technique at the same time was undoubtedly the correct one. The great Tao law and the transcendent formula seemed to be completely different or even contradictory. It seemed that one was strengthening the power of the gods, making the connection between the gods and their duties closer, while the other was allowing the cultivator to transcend the duties of the gods, breaking away from the restrictions of the duties and becoming more powerful. You are at ease. But in fact, the two of them could go hand in hand to a certain extent. The great Tao could increase the strength and realm of the gods, allowing them to reach the peak of the heavenly god level. On the other hand, the transcendence technique provided the opportunity to transcend. Naturally, one had to reach the peak in order to surpass the transcendence technique. From the looks of it, these two techniques were essentially increasing the cultivator's strength and realm. If they were to cultivate at the same time, although there was the danger of mutually rejecting each other, at the same time, if one could grasp the relationship between them and grasp a delicate balance, then the progress of both would be greatly improved. It would also allow cultivators to have a deeper understanding of the nature of these two cultivation methods. And that was exactly what the god of Buzhou Mountain was doing. It was also because of this that Luo Fan felt that it was such a pity. After all, to be able to instinctively know how to cultivate two cultivation methods to achieve the best results, this kind of cultivation talent was really eye-catching. Sighing, Luo Fan could only suppress this feeling of pity in the depths of his heart. Just as he was about to move forward, he suddenly felt something calling out to him. After observing for a while, Luo Fan couldn't help but reveal a strange smile. He seemed helpless, as if he didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he also seemed a little warm. He raised his left hand and opened his sleeve. A transparent, fist-sized, three-dimensional talisman that was outlined by countless complicated and mysterious lines rushed out of his sleeve. It floated in front of him, moving up and down. It was very stable and mysterious. There was a tiny, dust-like figure of an infant in the middle of the talisman. The infant was pink and rosy, looking extremely cute. At the moment, the infant was floating around in the fist-sized talisman. He looked very happy. When the talisman suddenly appeared in front of Luo Fan, the infant showed an instinctive smile. He opened his arms and giggled. "Daddy! Daddy!" Luo Fan heard the voice coming from the 3-meter-wide space opened up in the talisman. Naturally, he also heard the infant's cute voice. This talisman was formed by the midday rest technique, and the infant was naturally formed by the heavy turbid Yin talisman, which had turned Yin into Yang. It was Luo Fan's cheap son. The call that he had sensed earlier was the instinctive call of his cheap son after he woke up from a deep sleep. After some calculations, It had been several decades since his cheap son had entered the midday rest technique. It was indeed about time for him to wake up. With a complicated expression, he raised his hand and clenched it lightly. The talisman formed by the midday rest technique instantly collapsed and turned into a wave of connate vitality. Like rivers flowing into the ocean, it directly entered the infant's body and instantly turned into a wave of vitality energy. It strengthened the infant's body, causing it to grow dozens of times bigger in just a breath's time. Originally, after the midday rest technique collapsed, the infant had already returned to its original size, the size of a thumb. Now, after the connate vitality rushed into it, its size grew again. In the blink of an eye, it had already reached the size of a normal infant. This size made it look even cuter, and made one feel even more sorry for it. "Daddy, Daddy," the infant giggled. It didn't seem to care about its sudden increase in size, or perhaps it didn't understand the fact that it had suddenly grown bigger. After it appeared, it opened its arms and wanted Luo Fan to hug it, transforming it into connate vitality to strengthen the living being that was resting inside was not the power of the midday rest technique itself. The reason this power appeared at this moment was because the energy that formed the talisman itself was Luo Fan's mana. It was created from the mana unit that already possessed limitless power and was extremely mysterious. Therefore, with just a thought, he could change the talisman at will, causing the nature of the talisman to change according to his needs. Therefore, this kind of power that originally did not exist would appear on the spherical talisman created by the midday rest technique. Of course, the reason why this power could produce such a powerful effect was because the baby had stayed in the midday rest spell for several decades. As a result, every shred of connate origin chi and energy in the space had been subconsciously absorbed by him, and without him realizing it, he had left his mark on it. Hugging an infant was something that Luo Fan had never done before. Even if he had seen it before and knew how to carry an infant in theory, how could he immediately put it into practice? As the infant floated towards him with its arms outstretched, Luo Fan, who had already attained the fruit of the earthly immortal realm and had also become the teacher of the sage and the master of heaven and earth, was at a loss as to what to do. He hugged the infant in a fluster and almost let it dangle upside down. He couldn't get into the normal posture that he remembered. Ha 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 ha! The infant wasn't afraid at all despite being tossed around like this. Instead, it found it very interesting and giggled. The joy that came from the bottom of its heart made Luo Fan both happy and anxious. He almost broke out in a cold sweat. Hugging an infant is so troublesome. Luo Fan finally couldn't take it anymore. He raised his hand and the chaotic vital energy in the cave behind him instantly surged out and gathered between his hands. It compressed and condensed into a gray cloud that wrapped around the infant's body and supported him. Only then did Luo Fan escape from that awkward state. This won't do. I have to find some people to help take care of him. Otherwise, I'm afraid that in a few years, this kid will be tortured to death by me. Luo Fan looked at the infant in the cloud that was still reaching out to Luo Fan and felt helpless. After some thought, Luo Fan decided on the babysitter for the infant. In reality, he didn't have many choices. It was obviously impossible to let a magic treasure or artifact take care of the infant. Who knew if the infant's personality would develop into a magic treasure or artifact after he was carried out? Taking care of my son on my behalf is a great opportunity for you. Who knows, if you take good care of him in the future, I might even take you as my disciples. Luo Fan thought to himself. You don't seem to have a name yet. Since you've become my son, your surname should be Luo. As for your name, let's call you Luo Fu. Suddenly, Luo Fan thought of an awkward problem and quickly made a decision. Chapter 72. It had been tens of thousands of years since Luo Fan had arrived in the untainted world, but he had only met 5 or 6 beings with spiritual awareness. Among them, the only one who had a conflict with him and was subdued by him was the Yin-Yang Flood Dragon, who was guarding the innate inextinguishable spiritual light more than 2 million miles away from Buzhou Mountain. With a thought, Luo Fan took Luo Fu, who was wrapped in the gray cloud, and turned into a rainbow, rushing toward the west. After a short while, they had already arrived more than 10,000 li away, in the area that had been sealed by the Limitless Void Palace. The Limitless Void Palace had sealed the surrounding area. It could block all disturbances from the outside world, but it had no effect on Luo Fan. He landed next to the primordial Qi source and glanced at Hong Jun. He found that Hong Jun was still absorbing the primordial Qi to cultivate the indomitable heaven and earth technique to increase his cultivation. It seemed to be quite smooth. He was relieved. With a thought, he had entered the spirit space inside the Wuji Void Palace. This mini-kiliacosm was boundless. After several upgrades, it now looked more like a complete world. The land that was tens of millions of miles below was suspended in the void. There were all kinds of terrains on it, including oceans and lakes. It looked full of vitality and beautiful scenery. It was a perfect resort. When he arrived here, Luo Fan felt that the primordial Qi he had entered was very thin. It made him a little uncomfortable, but there was a feeling of absolute control that made him feel very comfortable. This kind of complicated and strange feeling was naturally formed because he had stayed in the untainted world for too long. He had adapted to the concentration of primordial Qi in the untainted world, and he was the creator of this spirit space. He raised his hand and gently guided the cloud that wrapped around Luo Fu a little. It gently attracted Luo Fu's attention to the mysterious scene in the Wuji Void Palace. Luo Fu was a baby. Sometimes he was very stubborn. Except for his goal, he didn't care about anything around him. Sometimes he was very fickle. With just a small change, he could immediately forget everything before and start to pay attention to new things. At this time, Luo Fu's attention was attracted by this. Giggle. Luo Fu wandered in the cloud, observing this novel world. He laughed joyfully. His lively and lovely appearance made Luo Fan feel infected. With a thought, the void moved automatically. Luo Fan had already brought Luo Fu to the platform in the Thunderbolt Pool. The two yin-yang flood dragons were suppressed by Luo Fan in the depths of the lightning pool. According to the time inside the Limitless Void Palace, it had been more than 10,000 years since then. After such a long period of time, even if the two flood dragons hadn't forgotten their hatred for Luo Fan, their hatred shouldn't have been as deep as it had been for a long time. Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed. The Thunderbolt Pool surged. A spherical, dusky crystal ball rushed out, breaking free from the suppression of the lightning pool, arriving in front of him. It spun, revealing a bit of profoundness. Inside the gray crystal ball, there were countless talismans constantly flowing, turning into chains that tightly bound the two flood dragons. The two flood dragons completely lost control of their bodies and energy. They were like mosquitoes trapped in amber, frozen in the crystal ball. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and covered it. The crystal ball instantly collapsed and turned into a big ball of powder. The rich chaotic Qi of the three was instantly absorbed by the Wuji Void Palace and disappeared without a trace. In front of Luo Fan, everything became clear again. The two flood dragons lost their restraints, and their bodies expanded dramatically. In the blink of an eye, they had already returned to their true size. The black and white flood dragons, which were tens of thousands of meters long and hundreds of meters in diameter, hovered in the air, expanding and contracting. An extremely powerful aura emanated from them. As soon as the two dragons appeared, they roared to the sky. The sound was almost tangible, and it reverberated in the top hall. Looking at the two powerful dragons wreaking havoc, Luo Fu did not have a trace of fear. Instead, he seemed to be very interested. He opened his hands as if he wanted to hug the dragons. He laughed and said, I want. He. Luo Fan saw this and was very proud of his choice. It seemed that Luo Fu really liked these two dragons. It was really a wise decision to let them be his nanny. At that moment, the two WYRMS were still roaring, and their voices were gradually filled with confusion and bewilderment. It seemed that they did not understand the current situation. Luo Fan's mind moved, and a mental cultivation method mnemonic chant flowed through his mind. Following this mental cultivation method mnemonic chant, he felt that his mind and the two flood dragons' minds were completely connected. This was his mind reading technique. Where is this? Why are we here? It was the voice of the male dragon. We seem to have been robbed once. What was robbed? It was the voice of the female dragon. Luo Fan heard this. As he expected, the two dragons' spiritual consciousness was not complete. Therefore, their memory was really limited. After being sealed for tens of thousands of years, they really had forgotten about the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. This caused him to rejoice in his heart. Although even if they remembered about the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he still had a way to make them good nannies for Luo Fu. However, it was still troublesome. This was naturally the best situation. With a thought, countless complex and abstruse characters and patterns instantly flowed through his mind. They quickly condensed and turned into a mysterious dual cultivation technique. Golden Dragon Transformation Technique was the name of this technique. This technique was very mysterious. It required two dragons to cultivate together. It was called dual cultivation. This kind of dual cultivation was not the same as what men and women did in bed in the future. Instead, it was a more mysterious and profound cultivation method that was filled with endless mysteries. Cultivating this technique could make the bodies of the dragons even tougher and more mysterious. In the end, they could evolve into dragons. In addition, if the male and female flood dragons were to cultivate this cultivation technique together, they would obtain a special ability, and that was to be able to intersect their heads and tails to form a huge pair of golden scissors that could cut through everything in the world, all tangible and intangible things. This power, of course, was the inspiration that Luo Fan obtained from the legendary golden dragon scissors. It was also a small restriction that he left on the two dragons. After all, he had to hand over Luo Fu to them. No matter how much he trusted them, they were once enemies, so he had to be on guard. With this cultivation method, they would be able to cultivate their own Dharma treasures, and they would be able to control them. That was already the best restriction. With a point of his finger, the cultivation method condensed into a speck of light and suddenly rushed out. It split into two and rushed into the foreheads of the black and white flood dragons, fusing with their memories. Good technique. I met a good person. Great. I have a technique to cultivate. The two flood dragons received the spiritual light transmitted by Luo Fan and instantly understood the profoundness of the golden flood dragon transformation Tao. An indescribable joy was transmitted into Luo Fan's heart through his mind connection. Luo Fan smiled slightly. He was very satisfied. Although this cultivation method had some limitations, it was still an exquisite cultivation method. Its power was quite astonishing, and it was specially created for these two flood dragons. These two flood dragons did not cultivate cultivation methods and only knew how to attack with brute force. It would be strange if they did not like it. Chapter 73. I have countless similar techniques. Are the two of you willing to become my mountain guardian divine beasts under my wing? If you are willing, you can choose this cultivation method at will, and your strength will improve greatly. Luo Fan transmitted this thought into the minds of the black and white water dragons. Everyone had already seen how naive and gullible those two flood dragons were. Luo Fan's thoughts were transmitted. The result was obvious without even looking at it. Good. Good. The male and female voices were transmitted into Luo Fan's mind almost at the same time, and there was even a sense of joy and excitement. It was as if they were afraid that if they agreed too slowly, Luo Fan would change his mind. But, guardian beasts, what are they? Then, the female water dragon shyly transmitted this thought. When Luo Fan felt this thought, he was very happy. In this way, everything would go smoothly. He transmitted all the things that a nanny should do into the minds of the two water dragons. Luo Fan's theoretical knowledge about nannies was naturally very rich. It was what he had heard and seen on Earth. It was just that it was a little difficult for him to put these theories into practice. Therefore, he believed that the knowledge that was transmitted into the minds of the two water dragons was enough for them to take care of Luo Fu until he could grow up and be independent. So this is what the guardian beasts do. It's very simple. Of course, the words that the black and white water dragons used were not the same, but the meaning was the same. Seeing that they agreed, Luo Fan was really happy. With the incomplete spiritual consciousness of the two water dragons, it was naturally not possible for them to be Luo Fu's nannies. Therefore, he had to keep them here to cultivate for a period of time. At least, they had to have a human form and a complete spiritual consciousness. For Luo Fan, the concentration of vitality in this Wuji palace was far from enough. At most, it could only help him improve a little. But for the black and white water dragons, whose strength and realm were far inferior to his, this was already a cultivation saint. In an instant, Luo Fan had already made a judgment. The cultivation environment here is excellent. The two of you can cultivate well here. I hope the two of you will be able to achieve something soon. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The everlasting void palace changed. Yes, Master. The two flood dragons got into the zone very quickly and changed their words in the blink of an eye. Luo Fan didn't care about them. He controlled the limitless palace to produce its own mystical changes. In the blink of an eye, when the time inside the top hall became 365 times the normal time, the time outside the top hall became normal, which was the same as the time in the primordial world. Subsequently, he took a step forward and left the two WRMs to cultivate the golden WRM dragon transformation Dao above the pool of lightning, whereas he himself brought along Luo Fu, who was enveloped by the gray clouds, and left the top hall. In about half a year's time, they will be able to cultivate a complete spiritual consciousness and then transform. Luo Fan thought to himself. The half a year's time he mentioned naturally referred to the primordial world outside the top hall. For the black and white water dragons, this period of time was probably equivalent to more than 180 years. Giggle, giggle. Daddy. Daddy. Hug Luo Fu's cute voice woke Luo Fan up from that state of thinking. This made Luo Fan, who was originally calm and seemed to have everything under control, collapse. But how should I get through this half a year? No matter how worried he was, time would not stop because of him. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. In this half a year's time, Luo Fan was in dire straits. He had just become a father, without any experience and without any psychological preparation. Even if he had rich theoretical knowledge, how could he do it smoothly? Fortunately, Luo Fu was not an ordinary baby, so he would not be tortured to death by Luo Fan's careless care. Instead, he gained indescribable happiness from Luo Fan's various mistakes. In this half a year, he laughed incessantly. At this time, Luo Fan was taking Luo Fu to a cliff. Luo Fan grabbed some clouds and condensed them into various biological forms. He placed them in front of Luo Fu and let Luo Fu play with them. Suddenly, two mysterious auras soared into the sky from the top of Dang Ling Ju Hall. These two auras intertwined with each other, forming a pillar of light that soared into the sky. Then, the energy in the entire Wuji Palace trembled. It was as if a powerful suction force was exploding in the Wuji Palace. However, because the Wuji Palace was too big, the suction force did not cause too much of an effect. Luo Fan's senses were extremely sharp. In that instant, he discovered that the lightning pool in the depths of the Lingjue Peak Hall was in an uproar. Then, bolts of earth divine thunder burst out from the thunder pool and shot towards Zhongyu. On the other hand, the platform was covered by the dark purple divine thunder of earth element. There seemed to be something mysterious brewing in it, stretching and vibrating. The two streams of aura that were entangled with each other were coming from that spot. I finally succeeded. When Luo Fan saw it, he knew that the thing he had been waiting for over half a year had finally happened. He was overjoyed. He raised his hand to disperse the clouds and mist, then said to Luo Fu with a smile, "Come, Fu-er, let father bring you to meet two fun companions." Although Luo Fan had been through a lot in the past half a year, he had made some progress. At least, he would never have said these words half a year ago. Haha! Luo Fu giggled and opened his hands. It was unknown whether he understood what Luo Fan was saying or not. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. Then, he and Luo Fu arrived at the depths of the top hall of the Lingjue Peak Hall. They floated above the lightning pool and looked at the changes that were brewing on the platform. Naturally, the divine thunder of earth element could not block Luo Fan's vision. At this moment, the male and female flood dragons had shrunk to over 10,000 times their original size. Both of them were only 10 feet long, entangled with each other on the platform like two pythons. They kept wriggling and emitting a mysterious aura. The surrounding thunder pool was rocking and rolling, with thunder water rippling and releasing bolts of dark purple earth divine thunders towards them, constantly bombarding their bodies. The power of the divine earth thunder of Wutu was quite shocking, especially when it was coexisting with the Wuji Palace. It naturally carried a mysterious aura, making its power even stronger. Enveloped and bombarded by the divine earth thunder of Wutu, the bodies of the black and white Jiao dragons were constantly being damaged and healed. The whole process seemed to be simple and violent, yet it seemed to contain some kind of profound secret. Luo Fan's mind moved, and a mental cultivation method's mnemonic chant flowed through his mind. Suddenly, two beams of golden light shot out from his eyes, covering the entire platform. It was the magic that allowed him to see through the formation and see through the origin. As the golden light shrouded him, he instantly saw the energy changes in the bodies of the black and white flood dragons. At this moment, the chaotic energy in their bodies, which was so dense that it was almost compressed into a substance, was constantly being twisted and broken apart as their bodies were being reborn. It then condensed into another mysterious energy. This mysterious energy had different appearances in the bodies of the male and female flood dragons. In the body of the female flood dragon, it was black. In the body of the male flood dragon, it was white. The two came from the same place but had different forms. They had different characteristics, with a slight distinction between yin and yang. Chapter 74. The quality of the black and white energy, which was slightly yin and yang, was extremely high. It was not inferior to the mysterious yin energy in Hongjuan's body at all. The black and white energy constantly replaced the energy in the bodies of the black and white Jiao dragons, enriching their bodies. As the energy continued to increase and replace each other, the two black and white flood dragons also began to change, gradually transforming from flood dragons to divine dragons. After half a day, the black and white Jiao dragons with the body of a snake, the legs of a lizard, the claws of an eagle, the tail of a snake, the antlers of a deer, the scales of a fish, the whiskers at the corners of their mouths, and the pearls on their foreheads had completely replaced the original two Jiao dragons. Roar! Two loud dragon roars resounded through the heavens and the earth. After that, the bodies of the two black and white divine dragons that were curled up on the platform shook and dispersed the countless divine lightning of earth element that were assaulting the platform. Then, clouds and mist appeared around their bodies and carried them up into the sky. As they soared into the sky, a very violent aura emanated from the two Jiao dragons. It was so overwhelming that it made people feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. Of course, this was not the case for Luo Fan. It took 200 years for the golden Jiao dragon to transform into a dragon. Luo Fan looked up at the black and white Jiao dragons that had expanded to a length of tens of thousands of feet, wrapped in clouds and mist, and let out a long sigh. Although he did not transform into an innate Taoism aptitude, transforming into a Jiao dragon was still the same. Dragons could be big or small, and they could rise or hide. When they were big, they could breathe out clouds and mist. When they were small, they could hide themselves. When they rose, they could soar into the universe, and when they hid, they could hide within the waves. With such great power, transforming into a human was naturally a small matter. As expected, the two Jiao dragons let out a long roar of joy in the sky. After chasing each other for a while, they suddenly turned into black and white rays of light and fell to the ground. In the blink of an eye, they condensed into a man and a woman who were about 15 or 16 years old. The man and woman were like a golden boy and a jade girl. Both of them were covered in makeup and looked extremely beautiful and adorable. However, on their foreheads, there were two antlers that looked very soft and delicate, telling others that they were not normal people. "Thank you, Master, for bestowing the technique upon us." The golden boy and jade girl bowed to Luo Fan the moment they appeared. Their voices were crisp and clear. The gratitude contained within them was absolutely from the bottom of their hearts. Moreover, based on their conversation and performance, it was obvious that they already possessed complete spiritual sense. Obviously, the benefits of the golden serpent dragon transformation Dao were unimaginably great to them. Luo Fan descended with Luo Fu and stood in front of the two of them. He looked at them and nodded to himself. "This is because the two of you are extremely talented. Otherwise, although this cultivation method is mysterious, it would not have allowed the two of you to improve so much in such a short time." "Ha ha! Ha ha!" Luo Fu, who was watching from the side, was extremely interested. Now that he landed on the ground, he began to chuckle. With a crisp sound, he controlled the cloud and floated forward. In a short while, he arrived in front of the golden couple. Over the past half a year, Luo Fan had modified the cloud around Luo Fu several times for convenience. Through his modifications, the cloud already possessed a trace of the power of a magic tool. It could be used as a means of transportation to travel around, and it could also change its form slightly. "Greetings, young master." The dragon boy and dragon girl that the black and white water dragons had transformed into hurriedly bowed. They did not dare to be careless because of Luo Fu's young age. The dragon girl's eyes shone brightly, and her gaze towards Luo Fu was filled with love. "Ha ha! Hug hug!" Luo Fu's senses were sharp, and he could tell how the two people in front of him treated him. He chuckled and stretched out his arms towards the girl. The black and white water dragon's spiritual awareness had only just been replenished, but they had long since remembered everything Luo Fan had said about what the guardian beasts should do. As soon as they saw Luo Fu, they knew that taking care of this young master was their most important task, and did not dare to be negligent. The girl extended her arms with great joy, and gently picked up Luo Fu. Her movements were even more precise and gentle than Luo Fan's, making Luo Fu feel very comfortable, and a happy smile appeared on his face. Luo Fan was satisfied when he saw this, and knew that he had made the right decision in letting the black and white water dragons be his nanny. Fortunately, this was the case. Otherwise, if Luo Fan had continued to take care of Luo Fu, he would have doubted whether he would have the time to cultivate after he grew up. According to Luo Fan's observation, based on the speed of Luo Fu's growth over the years, Luo Fu's entire childhood would take at least tens of thousands of years. How could he bear this? "Do the two of you have names?" Suddenly, Luo Fan remembered that he did not know the names of the black and white water dragons, and did not know how to address them, so he hurriedly asked. "Master, my name is Aolai and she is Aoin." The dragon male who did not carry Luo Fu quickly replied respectfully. Luo Fan nodded to show that he understood and said, "Aolai, Aoin, the two of you will take good care of the young master from now on. I can give you the authority to enter and leave the everlasting palace. This place is the top palace, and I have already arranged a place for you two to stay. You can take the young master to play. The yellow scarf warrior will tell you what to do." Understood. Aolai and Aoin did not dare to be negligent, and quickly agreed. Looking at Luo Fu, who was so happy that he almost forgot about him, Luo Fan let out a sigh of relief. He waved his hand and moved through the void. Ao Lai, Ao In, and Luo Fu disappeared in front of him, and in the blink of an eye, they went to the front palace of the top palace. With a thought, the yellow scarf warrior who was busy in the top palace had already accepted Luo Fan's intention. He knew that the sudden appearance of the few extra people in the palace were the palace's guests, and they needed to serve them. One of the yellow scarf warriors went up to greet them, guided them around the top palace, and confirmed their respective residences. In fact, it was just for show. According to Luo Fan's understanding, it was difficult for Ao Lai and Ao In to have time to live in the palace. After paying attention for a while, Luo Fan was relieved, and with a thought, he stepped out of the everlasting palace. It was only half a year, and Hong Jun was still cultivating, looking no different from before. Using the power to see through the origin, he found that Hong Jun's condition was very good, so he did not take him seriously. He took a step, and his body turned into a long rainbow, flying up. Now that he had the authority to control the top of Buzhou Mountain, and he had refined it into a talisman, it was time to make some arrangements on the top of Buzhou Mountain. The top of Buzhou Mountain was 100,000 miles away from the ground. With Luo Fan's perception range of 20,000 miles, he could not know what was on the top of the mountain. Therefore, at this time, Luo Fan was quite curious about the top of Buzhou Mountain. He turned straight up and released his perception along the way. Everything within 20,000 miles was included in his mind, and he carefully observed the various mysterious scenes on Buzhou Mountain. Buzhou Mountain was the backbone of Pangu, and the primordial sky pillar. The cultivation environment was the most wonderful in the world, but it did not mean that the scenery was very beautiful. The chaotic vitality chi on the mountain was almost endless. As the mountain went higher, the number of chaotic vitality chi sources increased. With the passage of time, within the range of Luo Fan's perception of 20,000 miles, these chaotic energy sources became more and more concentrated. When he directly rushed over 20,000 miles, he could no longer see any gaps in his perception of chaotic energy sources. As the number of chaotic vitality chi sources increased, Buzhou Mountain became more and more desolate. At the foot of the mountain, there were all sorts of mysterious and lush plants growing. Although they were not complete due to the contamination of the chaotic yuan qi, their exuberant vitality could be sensed by anyone. By the time they reached the 20,000-kilometer mark, all they could see was a stretch of grayish mountain rocks that had been tempered by the primal chaos qi. In the future, these would be treasures that were hard to find even with money. But at this time, they were common goods that could only be barely calculated with numbers in the hundreds of millions of tons. Although Luo Fan had the intention to investigate this Mount Buzhou in order to find some precious materials to refine or improve his cultivation base, he was more concerned about the situation at the top of Mount Buzhou. Thus, he did not stop. His figure turned into a long rainbow, and his speed was very fast. He passed through the mountain, but did not enter, and directly rushed to the top of Mount Buzhou. Chapter 75. From the foot of the mountain to the top, Buzhou Mountain was 100,000 miles long. From the untainted land, it plunged straight into the layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire 90,000 miles above the ground, and finally reached the mysterious, endless starry sky above. The long rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into rushed straight up. Along the way, no matter how mysterious the scenery was, he didn't stop. After a short while, he had already rushed up 90,000 miles, directly entering the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer. The layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire was divided into 9 layers, distributed in the sky above the entire untainted land, like a protective layer. Each layer was 1,000 miles thick. Although it was composed of astral wind, thunder, fire, and other kinds of energy, the higher it was, the more mysterious it became. However, relatively speaking, Buzhou Mountain was even more mysterious. It plunged straight into the layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire, and was not repelled or even attacked like other objects that entered the layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire. Within a radius of tens of thousands of miles around Buzhou Mountain, the layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire seemed to be pushed away by a mysterious invisible force, leaving a huge empty space that could not be approached within 10,000 miles of Buzhou Mountain. In this empty space, there was no astral wind, thunder, or fire, but there was an incomparably dense chaotic energy, which filled every inch of space in the entire empty space. The moment the rainbow transformed by Luo Fan rushed into the layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire, he felt his whole body suddenly become heavy. The speed of the rainbow instantly slowed down by 10 times. Although it was still extremely fast, compared to before, it was like a snail. The moment the rainbow entered the layer of astral wind, thunder, and fire, the boundless and unyielding aura that was constantly emitted by Buzhou Mountain seemed to be compressed, and abruptly increased by more than 10 times. The higher one went, the stronger it became. According to Ji Hao's estimation, when he reached the top of the mountain, the aura would be at least 100 times stronger than that at the bottom. The cultivation method that Luo Fan cultivated was derived from the form of Buzhou Mountain, and had a very mysterious connection with the aura emitted by Buzhou Mountain. Shrouded by this terrifyingly desolate and unyielding aura, he felt as if his soul had been tempered by a kind of gentle and lasting tempering. It felt both bitter and comfortable. At the same time, his perception of his surroundings became more and more acute. His range of perception, which was the reflection of the outside world in his mind, had shrunk by more than 10 times as a result. It had shrunk from the original 20,000 kilometers to 2,000 kilometers, and it continued to shrink as his body continued to rise. As expected, Luo Fan thought to himself. He wasn't disappointed or surprised at all. He had already anticipated that the situation would change after entering the astral wind lightning fire layer. Although this change was beyond his imagination, it wasn't to the extent of disappointing him. At this height, the primal chaos energy source no longer mattered. The entire Buzhou Mountain was a huge chaotic energy source that constantly emitted a steady stream of chaotic energy. The surrounding chaotic energy, which was so thick that it almost blocked one's sight, was emitted from any part of the mountain. When things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. At this point, the Buzhou Mountain, which was almost covered by the chaotic energy, didn't look so desolate anymore. Almost at every distance, there were all kinds of strange plants growing, and there were many obscure life forces breeding in various places, which added a kind of vitality to the Buzhou Mountain. It wasn't desolate anymore, where there were only mountains and rocks. With just one look, Luo Fan knew that these were the embryonic forms of innate gods. Of course, they were just embryonic forms. They were formed because of the mysteriousness of Buzhou Mountain. When such a mysterious Buzhou Mountain rose to the height of the astral wind lightning fire layer, because of the existence of the astral wind lightning fire layer, and because of the envelopment and oppression of the astral wind lightning fire layer, it barely maintained the environment of the time when the world was created. Although the chaotic energy was not as thick as the time when the world was created, it was enough to breed innate gods. However, it was hard to say how many of these plants and life forces could eventually breed innate god. According to Luo Fan's guess, the probability was not more than 1 in 1,000. After all, it wasn't the time when the world was created. No matter how well the environment was maintained, it was still different in essence. Luo Fan didn't stop to observe and comprehend these plants and life forces, because he knew that if he stopped to comprehend slowly, it would take him hundreds or even thousands of years to reach the top of Buzhou Mountain. Anyway, he had plenty of time in the future, and he didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble at this time. It was more important to reach the top of Buzhou Mountain first. The rainbow he transformed into continued to go up. Suddenly, when he reached the height of the 9th layer of the astral wind lightning fire layer, he suddenly felt that something in his sleeve was shaking violently. With a thought, the rainbow condensed again, and a young man wearing a grayish-brown robe came out. He floated in the void, raised his hand, and the shaking thing flew into his hand. It was golden, as big as a palm, and as thick as a card. However, it was very soft and light. It was the spiritual talisman that had fused with the god's spiritual sense of Buzhou Mountain. At this moment, the spiritual talisman was shaking violently, and the golden light flashing on it was expanding and contracting, twisting and changing shape. Looking at this situation, Luo Fan understood. He had reached the limit of the authority granted by the god of Buzhou Mountain. When he immersed his mind in it, he felt very satisfied, very safe, and more at ease. With a thought, he had a rough idea of the top of Buzhou Mountain. His body sank, and through the chaotic energy, he landed on a piece of chaos crystal on the top of the mountain. With another thought, the mountain moved slightly and the void shifted. The piece of chaos crystal disappeared with his body, leaving behind a hole with a diameter of 3 meters. At this time, Luo Fan had already been sent to the top of Mount Buzhou through a mechanism that existed in the unseen world. This place was like a huge island. It was slightly protruding and had a circumference of over 10,000 miles. The endless starry sky above seemed like it was right above their heads. An incomparably heavy pressure came from above, and the vast and unyielding aura had almost condensed into a solid form. As soon as he appeared here, Luo Fan felt an extremely strong pressure on his soul. An extremely heavy pressure, an extremely heavy responsibility, and a feeling that the entire world was pressing down on him, as if the safety of the entire world was placed on him, appeared in his mind. The rich chaotic energy at the top of the mountain stuck closely to the ground, and appeared to be in a state between a liquid and a solid state. This made the top of the mountain not look like a mountain, but like an ocean. It looked like it had been enduring an indescribably terrifying pressure for a long period of time. The piece of chaos crystal that Luo Fan was standing on suddenly sank when it appeared, and instantly smashed into the ground. It sank into the chaotic energy that was in a state between a liquid and a solid state, and with a spin, it disappeared without a trace. At this moment, the spiritual talisman suddenly floated up, and stopped 3 feet above Luo Fan's head. It emitted a golden light and covered Luo Fan's body, as if it was fixing his body in place, and also as if it was isolating something. At this moment, Luo Fan did not care about his own state at all. His mind had completely fallen into an unprecedented state of shock. He looked up, and his eyes flashed with the light of understanding. His body emitted an extremely mysterious aura, and it seemed to fuse with the vast and unyielding aura around him, which had almost solidified into a solid state. It seemed like they were fusing with each other, and also seemed to be communicating and exchanging something. So, this place has already entered the endless starry sky. Luo Fan understood something in his heart. Chapter 76. Above Luo Fan's head, the starry sky pressed down like a curtain that blotted out the sky and the earth. Endless starlight shone down from the sky, enveloping the top of the mountain with a circumference of 1,000 miles, and stirring up the chaotic energy on the mountain top. At this moment, Luo Fan's perception range had been compressed to less than 100 miles. In his mind, he could only reflect the scene within 100 miles. Compared to the ground, his perception range had been compressed by more than 200 times. However, with this range of perception of 100 miles, he was still able to include the entire starry sky in his mind from a vertical angle. The starry sky did not seem to have any length or width. No matter how broad his perception range was, he could not penetrate the endless starry sky and see beyond the world. However, no matter how narrow his perception range was, he could still see the end of the endless starry sky and the edge of the world. It was mysterious and wonderful beyond words. Buzhou Mountain cut through the 9 layers of astral wind, lightning, and fire, and finally reached the endless starry sky. Countless stars in the starry sky were emitting extremely dense starry energy, which constantly shone toward Buzhou Mountain. The silver light shone brightly, and the cold air was eerie. Luo Fan stood there quietly, looking at the distant, deep, and extremely mysterious starry sky. An indescribable feeling of heroism surged in his heart, and he felt like he was gradually becoming one with it. At this moment, the entire world seemed to be under his control. Although the endless starry energy was dense, in terms of quality, it was only equivalent to innate energy. It had almost no effect on the cultivation environment on the top of Buzhou Mountain. The talisman above Luo Fan's head emitted a golden light, protecting Luo Fan's figure. It seemed to be communicating with the entire top of Buzhou Mountain in some obscure and unpredictable way. An inexplicable aura was gradually emitted from it. It was as if the talisman was gradually becoming one with the top of Buzhou Mountain. On the other hand, Luo Fan himself was gradually stimulated by the deep and distant feeling of the endless starry sky and the boundless unyielding feeling of the Buzhou Mountain below. His mind entered an extremely mysterious state where he was neither human nor self. Endless spiritual sparks flashed violently in his mind. They were like little stars, appearing and disappearing at the same time. All kinds of inexplicable comprehensions flashed across his mind. For a moment, Luo Fan seemed to have comprehended countless profound and indescribable mysteries, but also seemed to have comprehended nothing. After an unknown period of time, Luo Fan's mind shook, and he awoke from that mysterious state of enlightenment. As soon as he woke up, he felt an indescribable joy welling up in his heart. The moment he woke up, he knew that the range of his perception had doubled. Furthermore, the magic power in his body had more than doubled. Unknowingly, the number of 129,600 three-dimensional talismans that made up the magic power had doubled, becoming as many as 259,200. However, the energy seemed to have split into two, causing the feeling of emptiness to become even more intense. It even made him feel that his power seemed to have decreased by a lot, but this did not stop him from feeling happy. Luo Fan sensed it and knew that he had unknowingly entered a state similar to an epiphany. Stimulated by the aura of the endless starry sky, stimulated by the rich aura emitted by the Buzhou Mountain, his understanding of the nameless cultivation method had improved. With a slight movement of his mind, the magic power began to circulate in his body according to the nameless cultivation method's route, and his mind was silently reciting the nameless cultivation method's mnemonic chant. As the magic power circulated, the endless chaotic chi under his feet was like a river flowing into the sea, extending into hundreds of streams of chaotic chi. They went straight into his body and completely disappeared. The magic power, which had doubled in strength, continued to twist and disperse the endless chaotic energy. It was continuously purified, and in the end it was completely swept away. After 81 cycles, all the magic power condensed in his elixir field, condensed into a ball, lively, jumping and shrinking like a strange fruit. It was the earthly immortal Tao fruit. This fruit was already significantly larger than the one he had seen in the past, and it appeared to be more complete, more vivid, and more profound. The life essence contained within it had also increased to a level that was visible to the naked eye. However, there was an extreme desire coming from the earthly immortal Tao fruit, as if it was eager for all the energy that could be absorbed. It was eager to absorb all the chaotic chi that could be found. Luo Fan did not succumb to this desire. He broke away from it with absolute perseverance. He counted with his fingers and knew that when he was in that state 10 years had passed. After sighing that there was not enough time, Luo Fan sensed the situation of Hong Jun and Luo Fu in the blink of an eye through the Wuji Palace in the void. Hong Jun had already finished his cultivation at this time. He had already mastered the second stage of the creation Jade Archive technique. At this time, he was there to consolidate his realm. And in the Wuji Palace, Luo Fu appeared to be a little unhappy. That expression on his very cute face was very strange. Ao Lai and Ao In were constantly coaxing him, jumping up and down, looking very funny. Luo Fan's mind moved. Through the Wuji boy's perception, he already knew the cause and effect. It was 10 years, and Luo Fu was a little tired of playing, but now he really wanted to see him. Luo Fan was touched and helpless at the same time. With a thought, the Wuji Palace instantly released the blockade of the space of 100 miles. It turned into a purple-yellow light, rolled towards Hongjun, rolled him up, and rushed to the top of Buzhou Mountain at an extremely fast speed. The speed of the Wuji Palace was several times faster than Luo Fan. After a while, it had already crossed 100,000 miles with Hongjun and arrived at the top of Buzhou Mountain. It stopped in front of Luo Fan and spat out Hongjun on the ground. Hongjun was adjusting his breath with his eyes closed, consolidating his progress over the years. Suddenly, he felt his body empty. The chaotic qi that was originally full of around him dispersed and was rolled up by a purple-yellow light. Hongjun already had experience with this kind of experience, so he naturally did not panic. Instead, he felt a little excited, because this meant that his master wanted to see him, which meant that the cultivation problems that he had accumulated for more than 10 years were going to be solved. When Hongjun came to the top of Buzhou Mountain, he behaved very strangely. It seemed that he was not used to it, as if he could not bear the burden. He didn't look like he had been living on the top of Buzhou Mountain all the time. This was a little different from what he said before. Luo Fan was a little confused, but he would not let Hongjun bear the pressure that he could not bear. With a thought, the talisman above his head turned, and a golden light was emitted, covering Hongjun's body and isolating the strong pressure from the outside world. "Greetings, Master." With the protection of the golden light, Hongjun behaved much more relaxed and bowed to pay his respects. "No need to be so polite." Luo Fan waved his hand, and an invisible force helped Hongjun up. He said, "Stand aside, there are a few people you need to see." Chapter 77. Since Luo Fan had given the order, Hongjun didn't dare to say anything and stood respectfully at the side. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The limitless palace rotated and spat out 3 figures. 2 were big and 1 was small. The big one was like a golden boy and jade girl, and the small one was like the son of Guanyin. All 3 of them were very cute. These 3 people were Dragon Boy Ao Lai, Dragon Girl Ao In, and Luo Fan's cheap son, Luo Fu. As soon as the 3 of them appeared, they were under the protection of the golden light emitted by the spirit talisman. The golden light condensed and formed a layer of dazzling golden surface beneath their feet, supporting them so that they did not appear too strange in the void. Because they were covered by the golden light, Ao Lai and the others didn't feel the slightest pressure, and their expressions didn't change in the slightest. Ao Lai and Ao In were working hard to coax Luo Fu when they suddenly felt the void shift. In the blink of an eye, they were in another world, and their master, Luo Fan, was standing right in front of them. After seeing clearly, they all cried tears of joy and bowed. Through the perception of the limitless boy, Luo Fan already knew that they had suffered all these years. They had been tormented by Luo Fu. While he sympathized in his heart, he also rejoiced inwardly, "Father, Father." At this time, Luo Fu had also discovered Luo Fan's existence. He opened his arms, and there was a look of grievance and joy in his eyes. He controlled the chaotic cloud that had become even more agile and rushed toward Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, he crashed into Luo Fan's arms and hugged him tightly, not letting go in the slightest. Feeling Luo Fu's burning emotions, Luo Fan also felt a faint warmth in his heart. She hugged Luo Fu and patted his back, sending a gentle and warm aura into Luo Fu's body. This didn't have much of an effect and only made him feel more comfortable. Luo Fu's growth rate was extremely slow. If an ordinary baby had lived for so many years, they would have already become old and frail. However, Luo Fu was still the same as before, looking as if he hadn't grown at all. "Father, Luo Fu closed his eyes in satisfaction, a look of extreme satisfaction on his face. This child was born because of me, so he recognized me as his father. In the future, he will be your junior apprentice brother. These two people are yin-yang divine dragons. They are the guardian divine beasts of my sect. Their magical powers are difficult to master. You can communicate with them in the future. Luo Fan saw the puzzled look in Hongjuan's eyes and explained. Hongjun didn't dare to be negligent and quickly saluted. Even if Luo Fu was just an infant, he was no exception. His admiration for Luo Fan had reached the realm of loving the house and its crow. As long as it was related to Luo Fan, he would be extremely respectful. Luo Fan introduced Hongjun to Ao Lai and Ao Yin. As for Luo Fu, he was just a baby, so he didn't mind. Ao Lai and Ao Yin were in fact Luo Fan's captive. Now that their spiritual senses were more complete, they gradually understood their situation. At this time, seeing that Luo Fan gave them face in front of his disciple, they couldn't help but feel grateful. They didn't mind becoming the guardian divine beasts of Luo Fan's sect as much as before. Hongjun, Ao Lai, and Ao Yin's spiritual senses were complete, but it was the first time they saw someone with a complete spiritual sense besides Luo Fan. Therefore, they all felt that it was very novel, but they didn't know how to communicate. Luo Fan looked at this scene and knew that these things weren't something he could manage, so he didn't bother. Thinking that Hongjuan's behavior was very different from what he expected, he had a thought and asked, "Disciple Hongjun, where is your cave abode?" Hearing Luo Fan's question, Hongjun didn't dare to be negligent and quickly said, "It's in a cave more than 1,300 kilometers below." "I see." Luo Fan finally understood why Hongjun was in such a difficult situation. Compared to Buzhou Mountain, which was 100,000 kilometers high, the cave more than 1,300 kilometers away from the top could naturally be considered as the top of the mountain. Although it was only a difference of more than 1,300 kilometers, the essence of the two was already completely different. The real top of Buzhou Mountain, which was where Luo Fan was at, was bearing the pressure of the entire endless starry sky and the terrifying pressure of heaven and earth merging. Hongjuan's cave abode was away from the pressure, but it only suffered the aftermath of the pressure, and the strength was almost negligible. This golden talisman only represented the control authority of the top of Buzhou Mountain, which was thousands of kilometers long. Naturally, Luo Fan couldn't set up the cave abode further down. With a thought, the golden light emitted by the talisman fluctuated slightly, and Luo Fan and the others moved through the void and arrived at the edge of Buzhou Mountain. With a thought, he casually rubbed the talisman, and a cave gradually appeared 490 kilometers away from the top of the mountain. This cave wasn't an ordinary cave, but it was simple and unadorned. Its shape and structure contained some kind of mystery, and it was very wide and well lit. There were 2 sentences on both sides of the main door: "I wish to live forever and live as long as the heavens." There were 3 words above: "Seeking Cave." Luo Fan led the group and landed in front of the cave abode. Looking at the simple cave abode, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and an endless amount of chaotic qi gathered toward the cave abode like iron filings attracted by a magnet. In the end, like rivers flowing into the sea, the chaotic qi flowed straight into the cave abode and gradually accumulated into a flowing substance on the ground. It was very soft, but it wasn't real water. When people stepped on it, it was like stepping on a soft carpet, and they wouldn't sink at all. After everyone entered the cave abode, the talisman suddenly rushed into the depths of the cave abode in the blink of an eye, and merged into a very inconspicuous corner. The cave abode shook, and dozens of stone rooms automatically formed. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed at the air. Dozens of huge pieces of chaotic qi iron instantly separated from the body of Buzhou Mountain and floated in his hand. With a thought, the mantra of the Hercules summoning technique flowed in his mind. A magical power unit suddenly revolved. After circulating 9 times around the mysterious trajectory of the Hercules summoning technique in his body, it transformed into a wisp of yellow light and gathered in his palm. Then, it suddenly rushed out and transformed into a complicated and mysterious three-dimensional seal. It continuously collapsed, exploded, and reorganized itself. In the end, it formed 9 layers of inconceivably complicated restrictions, which were inserted into the primal chaos iron one by one. The chaotic chi iron instantly collapsed, melted, and condensed. In the end, its volume was compressed by 10 times, and it turned into 10 yellow-skinned muscular men that were 10 feet tall. They were the yellow-turbaned strongmen. "Greetings, Master." The voices of the 10 yellow-turbaned strongmen were very loud, and they looked like real people. Luo Fan glanced at the 10 yellow-turbaned strongmen and knew that his refinement was very successful. They all had 9 layers of restrictions in their bodies, and they had more complete intelligence, so they could do more complicated things. He couldn't help but be very satisfied. After giving some instructions, the yellow-turbaned strongmen obeyed his orders and dispersed. Some cleaned and some tidied up. They seemed to be very busy. At that moment, Hong Jun and the others were attracted by everything in front of them. Whether it was the appearance of the cave abode or the appearance of the yellow-turbaned strongmen, they were already beyond their imagination. This kind of mysterious method, which was like the creation of things, made them even more determined to pursue Tao, to get closer to Luo Fan. Chapter 78. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and a mantra flowed through his mind. In an instant 2 rays of golden light shot out from his eyes and enveloped Hong Jun. This was the magic that he used the most, the one that could illuminate the origin. As the golden light enveloped him, he could see the specific state of Hongjuan's body. At that moment, the energy in Hongjuan's body had already undergone a mysterious change. Incomplete gray 3-dimensional talismans filled his meridian. There were 12,960 of these 3-dimensional talismans, and each of them was made up of 200 jade slips. They were rolled up into a scroll, just like a jade archive. Each of the jade slips seemed to be flashing with countless words and pictures, and the complexity and profoundness of it were difficult to describe with words. These 12,960 three-dimensional talismans were all very small, and the energy that formed the lines was very condensed, almost like spider silk. They condensed and took shape, and each of them continuously circulated in his meridians according to the circulation route of the art of supporting heaven and earth. Even at that moment, when he wasn't fully focused on cultivating, there were still threads of chaotic vitality seeping into his body, and they were constantly being twisted and integrated into his body. At first glance, it already had some form of magical power. However, it didn't have the ability to condense into a fruit of Tao, so it could only circulate in his meridians, and not condense in his dantian. Luo Fan looked at it, and he couldn't help but feel very satisfied. The Jade Archive of Creation Technique was indeed the most suitable cultivation method for Hong Jun. In these few years, he had actually cultivated the second stage of the Jade Archive of Creation Technique to the Great Perfection stage. At that moment, the energy in his body had already become an existence that was close to mana. Compared to real mana, its power was hundreds of times weaker, but compared to the original energy in his body, it was many times stronger. According to Luo Fan's concerns, if he could fully unleash the power of this energy and use the same cultivation method, the power would be at least 10 times stronger. Luo Fan thought for a while, and with a thought, countless complicated words and pictures swam in his mind, rotated, and condensed. In the blink of an eye, they condensed into a spiritual light. As soon as the spiritual light appeared, it rushed into the mud ball between Hongjuan's eyebrows along Luo Fan's finger. Hong Jun had already experienced it several times. He naturally knew that this was a technique bestowed by his master. He couldn't help but look excited. In his opinion, all the cultivation techniques that Luo Fan passed down to him were extremely powerful, possessed boundless might, and possessed boundless miraculous effects. Now that he saw Luo Fan imparting the technique again, he knew that he could learn an extremely mysterious technique. The distance between him and the great Tao was narrowing again. How could he not be excited? The spiritual light rushed into Hongjuan's mind through a mysterious mechanism and suddenly exploded, turning into countless complicated and mysterious words and patterns. They instantly rushed into his soul and completely integrated into his memory. Hongjun instantly understood countless mysterious methods. These methods were all about how to use the energy in the body that was similar to magic power. After understanding this, Hongjun understood how great this was for him. He knew that his strength was at least twice as strong as before. At the same time, he felt that he seemed to have faintly understood some mysterious secrets. It seemed that something was constantly emerging from the depths of his heart, as if it was going to completely integrate with his soul, pushing his cultivation realm to another level. This is the enlightenment I had when I was traveling in the untainted land. It turns out that I haven't absorbed all the enlightenment. Hongjun instantly understood. After this enlightenment appeared, he instantly felt endless gratitude towards Luo Fan. At the same time, he sighed in his heart, "It's so good to have a master. Thank you, master, for imparting the technique." After sighing, Hongjun bowed gratefully. "You can go to the side to absorb and comprehend." Luo Fan waved his hand, and a yellow-turbaned strongman came forward to lead Hongjun to a wide stone room to cultivate. Hongjun did not dare to be negligent. He also knew that this was the best for him. After thanking him, he left with the yellow-turbaned strongman. "You too." Luo Fan turned his head to look at Ao Lai and Ao Yin, who were looking at him eagerly, and pondered for a moment. The original form of Ao Lai and Ao Yin was a pair of yin and yang black and white flood dragons. It had only been 10 years since they successfully cultivated the golden flood dragon transformation method. Logically speaking, the two of them should not have completely understood this cultivation method. It was indeed not suitable for Luo Fan to teach them this cultivation method. However, seeing that the two of them had been tortured by Luo Fu for the past 10 years, if they did not show any gratitude, it would be a bit unreasonable. "Master, please be merciful." Ao Lai and Ao Yin naturally understood the situation and quickly bowed. Luo Fan could not show his gratitude. He nodded and said, "You two come out with me to practice the cultivation method." "Thank you, master." How could the two not understand that Luo Fan intended to teach them? They were naturally overjoyed. The three of them left the cave residence. Ao Lai and Ao Yin did not look at each other. Their tacit understanding was almost telepathic, and they could sense each other's thoughts just by sensing their aura. After a pause, the two of them directly soared into the sky. They rushed out of the cave residence, and their figures suddenly expanded, turning into two black and white divine dragons that were tens of thousands of feet long. They were awe-inspiring, as if they had an instinctive pressure on all life. Although their aura was countless times weaker than the aura emitted by Buzhou Mountain, it also had another kind of profoundness. It was not suppressed by the vast and unyielding vastness of Buzhou Mountain. The two divine dragons raised their heads to the sky and let out a long roar. Their voices shook the heaven and earth, stirring up the rich chaotic energy in the surroundings. Then, they coiled around each other, chasing each other, gradually twisting into a very mysterious and unpredictable shape, like a complicated three-dimensional talisman. Suddenly, the dragon roar exploded, and endless golden light instantly burst out from the three-dimensional talisman formed by the two divine dragons. After the golden light faded, the two divine dragons had turned into a pair of scissors that were 10 feet long. Its structure was simple and profound, black and white, and it looked very simple and unadorned. The chaotic yuan qi fluctuated slightly, and when it brushed past the blade of the scissors, it was as if it was cut in half. Anyone could see how sharp the scissors were at first glance. Luo Fan raised his hand, and the pair of scissors gradually shrank until it was 10 feet long, falling into his hand. It was cold and heavy, and it exuded an obscure murderous aura. With a thought, golden light shone from his eyes, and in the blink of an eye, it illuminated the source of the pair of scissors. It only took 10 years to cultivate 18 layers of restrictions. It seems that any innate god's aptitude is quite terrifying. Countless talismans and restrictions flashed in his eyes, and he already understood all of this. This pair of scissors was naturally a celestial tool that Ao Lai and Ao In had transformed after cultivating the Golden Jiao Dragon Transformation Technique. Golden Jiao Scissors. The Golden Jiao Dragon Transformation Technique was an incomparably mysterious magic art for dual cultivation. After cultivating it, not only could a Jiao transform into a dragon, but it could also fuse 2 Jiao dragons into an extremely mysterious celestial tool. At the peak of the initial stage, the Golden Jiao Scissors had a total of 81 layers of restrictions. After the 81 layers of restrictions were completed, if the fated opportunity was right, it could be transformed into a celestial tool. Its power would be increased by 100 times from the 81 layers of restrictions. After it was transformed into a celestial tool, the two's spiritual consciousness would completely fuse when it was transformed into a celestial tool. At that time, their realm, cultivation, and strength would all increase by a level,